Okay, here we are. Let's do this. I'm going to call us to order. This is TRPA's Advisory Planning Commission. Today's Wednesday, March 11, 2026. It's 9:36. And the first item on the agenda is the roll call. I'll go to Tracy for that, please.
Mr. Oling,
Present.
Ms. Carr. Good morning. Mr. Drake. Oh, excuse me. Mr. Drew.
Yes, there we go. Good morning.
Thank you. Mr. Ehrlich,
Present.
Mr. Ferry,
Yes.
Ms. Ferris,
Good morning.
Ms. Jacobson,
Here.
Mr. Letton,
Morning.
Mr. McNamara,
Good morning. Thank you.
Ms. Marulis O'Neill,
Good morning.
Ms. Cyber,
Good morning.
Ms. Stala,
Here.
Chief Drennan,
Good morning.
Mr. Hitchcock,
Morning.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you. Looks like we have really good attendance too. So thank you all for being here. I understand we're going to have a change in our Washoe County lay representative. Would you like to just take a moment and tell us a little short snippet about yourself and why you're sitting with us this morning?
Sure. I'm Harry Swenson. I live in Incline Village, and recently the Washoe County Commissioners put a call for a new appointee and requested that somebody that lived full time within the basin represent Washoe County. So I applied for it. My background in history, I'm a longtime NASA scientist and project manager. Spent many years in technology and scientific development and air traffic control and other areas of flight control. I've had a long love of this lake. My parents brought me up here in the 1960s. I was lucky enough to purchase a house here 14 years ago, and the second I retired from California, I came up here to live permanently. I will die here. I keep telling my wife that. Don't worry, you just cook me and put me in the backyard. I'll be fine. But I love this lake. I love this area. I love waking up every morning, and I have a passion for it. And since I came here after I retired from NASA, and I did a consulting gig for several years, and I needed someplace else to put my energies. And this one seemed to be a really right place that fit my desires, and it looked like fit the needs of your organization to help, with science. Or with me, I will delve into the science because I love it. And so there's a history of that. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope to be constructive and helpful for this group, and that's my plan.
Excellent. Yeah, we welcome you. Sounds like you're going to bring some very strong technical skills. So that's fantastic. And so Jim, this will be your last meeting, right? And then we'll do the transition. You're still the official member for this meeting. So
Until the 26th.
okay. For the confirmation. Okay. So
yeah, Jim was kind enough at the meeting where I was selected yesterday to inform me of the upcoming meeting, and asked me to attend or invited me to attend so I could get a running start. I appreciate Jim's professionalism in that regard.
yeah, great. And Jim, we thank you for your service. Greatly appreciated. And I think we'll do a more formal thank you to Jim, right, John?
I told him we'd bring him back to roast him.
Okay.
We might be kinder than that.
Yeah, we need a Jim roast. Okay, we'll do that. Great. I'll move us on to item 2. This is approval of our agenda. Any changes to the agenda?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Graham St. Michelle, General Counsel here with TRPA. I wanted to make a little point on the agenda. We've been receiving some questions from members of the public. Just about the public comment procedure, just a reminder, for APC. APC currently takes public comment shortly after the staff presentation on action items, but before the APC takes action. That's so some of the members of the public who frequent governing board meetings, it's done differently at governing board meetings. Again, APC is still what we would say maybe the old way. And I'll just let you know also that we transitioned to a new agenda format. And I think that's a little part of the confusion carries over from some of the governing board, the new agenda format for the governing board. So we're going to clean that up, make sure it's more clear next time, but just want to let everyone know how the comment will go this meeting.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, thank you too for that. I will go ahead and approve the agenda as it was posted. Approve, not approve, as it was posted for the record. And I'm going to move us to item 3. This is approval of our minutes. We do have a draft set of minutes from our February 11, 2026 meeting. That's on page 5 of your packets. Any member of the APC have comments on the minutes? Let me look at Zoom participants. What am I doing here? Okay, I see no hands raised. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Was that Eric? Thank you, Eric.
Second.
Second, Jennifer. Great. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Do we
And
have any?
I'll be
Abstain.
abstaining. Chairman, I wasn't here last week, Kate Rose, or last month.
Thanks, Kate.
Same
Any
here.
other?
This is Ben letting abstain. I wasn't in attendance last time.
Thank you, Ben. Got that? Okay. Thanks all. Okay, let's go to item 4, planning matters. Item 4A is a discussion of 6 policy concepts identified in the July 1, 2024 settlement agreement as part of the Cultivating Community Conserving the Basin Initiative. Information on this item can be found on page 43 of our packets. And I'm going to welcome Karen Fink to present on this item. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair, members of the APC. Karen Fink, Director of Long Range Planning. So as the chair mentioned, we're here today for a discussion of 6 policy concepts from a settlement agreement between TRPA and Mountain Area Preservation Foundation, and also referred to as MAP. This agreement occurred after the approval of the Phase 2 Affordable and Workforce Housing Amendments. Next slide, please. So today I'm just going to give you some background on Phase 2 and the concepts in the settlement agreement and talk about why we're here today. And the main part of the presentation that you'll be hearing today is on how the 6 policy concepts from this settlement agreement have been incorporated and considered in the Cultivating Community Conserving the Basin proposal. And then we want to open it up to you for additional discussion. Next slide, please. So in December 2023, as you recall, the TRPA Governing Board approved the Phase 2 Affordable and Workforce Housing Amendments, which modified development standards for deed-restricted housing only, with the goal of reducing the cost of construction for these units, enabling the building them closer to transit and services. The amendments also did give the local jurisdictions to adopt alternative standards, so alternatives to the TRPA standards that were at least as effective as TRPA standards in facilitating the construction of deed-restricted, affordable, moderate, and achievable housing. And El Dorado County is one jurisdiction that has taken advantage of that alternative, and their draft area plan is out for public comment now. So in February of 2024, MAP filed litigation challenging the Phase 2 amendments. TRPA and MAP resolved that litigation through a settlement agreement in July of 2024. Part of the settlement agreement included having MAP have a seat on the Tahoe Living Working Group, and they've been an active participant. And another portion of the settlement agreement called policy considerations provided that during the next phase of the Tahoe Living work, that TRPA would include a good faith discussion of these 6 enumerated policy concepts. So we decided, because these concepts were in the settlement agreement, we decided to agendize this so that we could revisit in a public setting how we've considered these concepts, where we've landed, and offer the opportunity for further discussion. So the next slide, please. So this slide here just shows the 6 policy concepts, and I'm going to go over these in more detail in the following slides. So next slide, please. Before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone of the overall structure of the Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin project, which is the current phase of our Tahoe Living strategic priority. And I know that most of you have seen an iteration of this slide several times, as you know, Jacob has presented it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if anybody wants me to further explain anything that I might have gone quickly over, feel free to ask me during the discussion. So the overall goal of the Cultivating Community, Conserving the Basin project and the Tahoe Living process is to make housing more attainable for local families, workers, and seniors while maintaining and strengthening our environmental protections. And in Cultivating Community, we split it into 4 discrete stages. For each of these stages, we've done community workshops on the North Shore and the South Shore. We've held at least 1 and usually more Tahoe Living working group meetings and community partner group meetings, which I'm also going to call the CPG. And in most of these stages, we've also met with the TRPA governing board. So we're currently wrapping up stage 3. Next slide, please. And then in this process, we've had some key deliverables that have come out of these 4 stages. And again, we've developed each of these with those through those community workshops and the Tahoe Living Working Group and the CPG. So one key deliverable is the vision and project outcomes. So that just sets the goals that we're working towards in this project. And that's our guiding document. And we keep kind of testing future deliverables against those project outcomes. We had a really long stage of idea generation. So working with the public and the advisory groups to come up with ideas for how we might achieve those outcomes. As we got started in the process, we included all 6 of the policy concepts from the settlement agreement in the staff report that presented the kind of launched the idea generation stage. We developed a briefing book, the growth management briefing book, which compared TRPA's code and our regional plan to the project outcomes to identify gaps where our code is not achieving those outcomes. And that helped us start to hone the ideas into policy proposals. We then created the draft policy recommendations, which the governing board advanced into environmental analysis at the January meeting. And then you saw those draft policy recommendations at the scoping meeting that you held last month. And soon we're going to start the environmental analysis and project refinement stage, the last stage of this process. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're into each of the policy concepts. I'm just going to describe them in a little more detail and talk about how they were considered in the process and where we landed with them. So the first one was to consider income limits on achievable housing, including but not necessarily limited to an income cap not to exceed 240% of area median income. And the definition would still include the work requirement and enforcement provisions. So reconsidering income limits was specifically called out as an idea in the briefing book, and those list of ideas was then discussed in small groups. The group discussion that the Tahoe Living Working Group and CPG had around deed restrictions trended towards allowing bonus units to have fewer restrictions rather than more. And basically where we landed with that was, kind of hearing a suggestion that suggested that some bonus units should be available to be only restricted against short-term rental or to be restricted specifically as used as a primary residence. I would say that the topic of adding an income cap to achievable wasn't really picked up by the Tahoe Living Working Group or the CPG in discussions. In general, there was discussion, and we did hear a lot from the public and particularly from the CPG, that the majority of the policies should be focused on our lower income and moderate income housing categories, which do have an income cap. So based on that, we incorporated a tiered concept where most of the incentives go towards tier 1, which is deed restricted affordable and moderate income. Deed restricted affordable has an income cap of 80% of AMI, and moderate income has an income cap of 120% of area median income. And then there's a set of tier 2 incentives, which do not have as many incentives as tier 1. And those are for achievable and affordable by design projects that don't have an income cap. So an example of an incentive that tier 1 would get that's being considered is to be exempted from coverage transfer requirements or excess coverage mitigation fees, as long as those fees can be offset. And tier 2 would get some reductions, but not as many as tier 1. So because of that, we did not move forward an income cap on achievable specifically, but instead put in more incentives for deed restricted, affordable, and moderate. So next slide, please. So the next concept was to consider an assessment of criteria to address potential site-specific impacts, including but not limited to impacts to scenic resources and public safety, in the event that TRPA considers development incentives in areas outside of town centers. So the policy package does include some incentives outside of town centers, such as incentivizing missing middle housing in more neighborhoods. And this one in particular, this assessment of criteria for site-specific impacts, we expect will be looked at in the EIS. So we will look at scenic and safety. These are always elements of our EIS, and site-specific additional criteria to evaluate site-specific impacts could well come out of the mitigation that's put forth in the EIS. We do already look at site-specific impacts in project review. Projects have to go through a number of findings, and one of them is requiring sign-off from fire protection agencies. All projects require that. They need to look at neighborhood compatibility and a variety of findings. So this one is still moving forward in the process. Next slide. So this one is to refine criteria for additional height outside of town centers. So reforming height standards was included in the briefing book and the list of ideas, and Tahoe Living Working Group and CPG members had a chance to discuss this in small groups. Changing height outside of town centers didn't rise to the top as a priority, so it was not just even any amendments related to additional height outside of town centers is not included in the package. So therefore, we didn't include criteria for additional height outside of town centers. MAP did identify a policy that is sort of similar to this that is in the package, and that is supporting the expansion of town centers where appropriate by local jurisdictions, which they can already do. But the policy that's in the package now would look at additional findings to encourage that infill development in more places, as long as it's meeting environmental goals or to help achieve environmental goals. So, but this one we're saying didn't move forward in the process, primarily because we're not looking at additional height outside of town centers. Next slide, please. So this one is to consider incentives and programs to unlock the existing housing supply, including but not limited to regulation of short-term rentals and investment in other programs like lease to locals, down payment assistance, or other equivalent programs. So this was included extensively in the packet and in our public workshop materials. It generated quite a bit of discussion. The policy proposal that you saw last month specifically calls for the EIS to study the impacts of providing for a certain portion of the housing need through our existing housing supply. So we are, this is moving forward in the process and will be further analyzed in the EIS. Next slide, please. So this one is actually go back. This is to consider additional strategies for reduction of vehicle miles traveled, including but not limited to e-bike share programs at project sites, and a few other options. So looking at VMT, again, this was included in the initial staff report. The discussion in general has focused quite a bit on VMT reduction, primarily through locating development close to transit and services. This one is a very specific strategy that, again, is most appropriately considered in the EIS. So there might be a need to look for additional VMT reduction strategies, and this is when this would come into play. And the next one, finally, is a 1 spot per unit minimum parking requirement. This was, again, included throughout the process in our materials. It was in the briefing book as an idea. I don't believe that we heard any working group or CPG member suggest that we should include a policy related to this in the package. At community workshops, we did hear about the importance of parking for residents. Workers need their cars. We definitely hear that, and we want to acknowledge that. We did also hear public comments specifically opposed to TRPA imposing minimum parking requirements. And just given the strong evidence and documentation in the literature and the experience of other places, that parking requirements are one of the biggest contributors to housing cost. And the fact that our current codes don't say that you can't have the parking that you need, we just stipulated that the local jurisdictions cannot set minimum parking requirements for deed restricted units. That doesn't mean that builders can't decide to build more parking. So because of those things, we did not add into the policy proposal a 1 spot per unit minimum parking requirement. So this one's not moving forward in the process currently. So this, I apologize, I see is too small, hard to read. But this just kind of summarizes what I've said about each policy, and I'm happy to revisit any of that in the discussion. So now we'll turn it back to the chair, and we'd just like to open it up for discussion and hear your thoughts. Is there anything that we missed? Should we still be looking at making some considerations regarding these? We still have the opportunity to incorporate these into the process as we're refining the policies and doing the environmental analysis. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that we have several members of the Tahoe Living Working Group here in the audience. Thank you for coming. And Jacob Stock and Alyssa Bettinger are also here, who are staff working on the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so there's a lot there, especially the first one. I got lost in all the detail and the numbers as I was writing. So this is pretty nuanced. Let me ask you, Karen, what's most helpful? Should we just do a smattering of speak freely, or do we want to run through these one at a time? Also, are we limited to just talking about these 6 things?
Yeah.
Just to clarify a couple things here.
Yeah, I think this is Graham St. Michelle. I think we should stay on the agenda as topic to follow, within the framework of these 6 concepts. And then in terms for the other part of the question, I mean, I might suggest going through and, having turn it over to the first concept and then talk about that one and then move on to the next one when that discussion's over. But you're welcome, just for the sake of tracking and an organization, but you're welcome to do it any way you want.
Does that work for you, Karen, or? Okay, I guess we'll try it and see how compliant everyone is. They might want to jump around, and I won't. I'm not going to jump across the table and stop you. So, okay, so maybe we can there you go. Perfect. That's what I was going to suggest. So first concept, 4.1, income limits on achievable housing. Anyone want to weigh in on that? Did anyone catch all those numbers and percentages?
I'm again more than happy to explain any aspect of this if someone needs more explanation.
Jennifer, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Jennifer Carr for the record. Sorry if I missed it, or maybe in a prior presentation or something, but how is the area medium and medium income established? We have MHI, we have the American Community Survey that comes out of the census, that goes down to census tract level. But yet, here an area medium income is a new term for me in this arena. So how is that established and on what frequency?
So the federal government and the state of California calculate area median incomes by county every year. So that's what we use. And those are published on the HUD webpage and California Department of Housing and Community Development. So these are county-wide. And then we just apply the, percentage to the median income. And we usually use a 3-person household kind of as just when we're describing it, if we're putting out examples of what an area median income might look like at that level. So just for an example, basin-wide, the area median income is actually about $100,000 per year for a 3-person household. So if you're at median income, your household's making around $100,000 a year.
So how do you pull in the Nevada communities?
The Nevada counties are calculated by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development.
And is it correct that the entire county is used? It's not the Tahoe Basin portion of, right?
Correct. That's what we use, the entire county.
Okay. So in a lot of cases, that's completely outside of Tahoe.
Robert Ehrlich, could you give the numbers per county so we have an idea of the variability between the California counties and the Nevada counties?
I'm going to ask one of the staff to pull it up, and then maybe we could come back to that question in a moment.
Great, thanks.
Jason.
Jason Drew for the record. Couple of questions. The bottom 3 items, I'm assuming these are all additive. You have to meet all 3 of them, right? It's not an or statement, it's an additive statement.
You mean including, so that this proposal suggests that we would have income limits on achievable housing plus a work requirement plus enforcement provisions. That's how we interpret this.
Okay, great, additive. Then 2 other questions. The 245%, I know this has moved over time. What was the genesis of the 245?
So the Placer County and Truckee they have quite a few programs in place that hone in on this number. And this is actually so we did have an income cap before on achievable when we first implemented the achievable category, and the income cap was set at the household income needed to afford the median priced home. And so 245% of median income is that amount basin-wide when you're doing a basin-wide average. One of the reasons that we moved away from that is because that percentage varied so widely across the different jurisdictions. For instance, in Washoe County, homes are so much more expensive that the income cap needed was 545 or 540% of AMI. And we just felt like it was more useful to focus on local workers. But so this is an average basin-wide, and we would probably, we would want to consider whether we just want to have this 245% as part of our definition, or whether we want to go back to having it vary by county. We then needed to recalculate that every year based on the sales prices of homes in the region.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'm sure there's never going to be a silver bullet. It will always, depending on a person's perspective, that there's logic behind what you just described. I think that the questions that I've been asked are around how this 245 was derived. So it may be you want to have an information sheet just on that specifically, because that seems to be one of the points of questions that come up with the information that I know when people have reached out to me. And then my last question is the local living work requirements. I also know there's been lots of discussion over time, and that has changed the definition of what that is. So what is the current definition that will be evaluated in the environmental document for local living work requirements?
So the current definition is that a household, I do just want to point out again, I think it's clear, but just in case it's not, this is the proposal that was included in the settlement agreement. We did not include this 245% income cap in our proposal. So that income cap is not in the proposal. But we've heard obviously MAP has advocated for that, and a few other public commenters have advocated for an income cap, adding an income cap back in, but currently we don't. So the definition of achievable is that the household living in the achievable unit either meets our affordable or moderate income requirements, so they're a lower or moderate income household, or they are a household that has at least one member of the household that works at least 30 hours a week or more for a business with essentially a local tax address, and the person's physical presence is required in the Tahoe or Truckee region for 30 hours a week. And then there's also one additional group that can use these, and that is a retiree who has lived in a deed restricted unit for 7 years or more. So there's multiple ways to qualify.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, you are proposing the enforcement piece?
Well, the enforcement piece is that's already included in our current deed restriction language. We do. Everyone who has a deed restriction has to turn in a annual certification form certifying that they're in compliance, and then they can also be audited.
Okay, thank you. After Robert, we'll go. Crystal, I see your hands online, so I'll come to you after Robert, okay?
Karen, I was just looking, the language used for the retired person, I didn't see that mentioning that a retired person who has lived in a deed restricted unit for 7 years. I'm just seeing it as a retired person who's lived in the Tahoe Basin for more than 7 years.
I apologize. I may have misspoken. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Crystal, let's go to you online.
Yeah, thank you. I first want to say that I really appreciate how this is all framed up in the staff report package. It's kind of, I think, very easy to follow. So just want to thank you, Karen, for your work on that. And then I have I guess a question and some comments. So I first want to just say, I would say Placer County recommends keeping the achievable with no income limits. And just for context, just want to talk about that 245. So 245 AMI in Placer County for two people is about 236,000. And so let's just say if there was a household in Placer where you've got, I'm just going to throw out a couple different professions, an associate planner at Placer and a school teacher in Placer with no children, they would earn more than that 245. So they would still struggle to purchase a house. So even, two fairly high level salaried professionals in Placer County would still struggle to purchase a house in Tahoe if it was set at that 245. So just to offer some context there. Additionally, I just want to mention, the region, I don't think has any evidence of achievable or local worker housing serving as luxury apartments. So we don't see that. And I know that was noted in your staff report package, Karen. And so I guess one of my questions would be, is there a way to survey those units that are restricted and have been built to know what level they're at? I don't know. I don't think through the deed restriction we can do that currently, but it would be, I think interesting to know what their levels are for these folks that are living in these sort of affordable by design units. And then I would also just say I do like the tiered approach that you've outlined, and I think I would say it meets the spirit and intent of what I think MAP and perhaps others. We're hearing a lot from people that are really wanting us to incentivize those lower income units. And so I do think the tiered approach that you've outlined kind of meets that spirit and intent of what we're hearing from the community. So anyway, those are my comments and question. Thanks.
Thank you, Crystal. Eric.
Thank you, Eric Young, Washoe County. So Washoe County residents have seen the no income cap as a kind of a loophole. And so, and have been concerned when we were going through our updates. I think you all probably remember this comments that came before this board, that was seen as a bit of a loophole for people to do luxury apartments for people who just have to live here anyway for whatever. So we have had to, be double down on our framing of that along with some help from TRPA, that it's not just about low income, that this whole effort, right? It's the Tahoe Living Working Group, and that the effort is to build and maintain community across a full scale of income, right? And so I think that we had to build that message on our own too often and stumble over that a little bit. And I think that TRPA in any messaging about this needs to, just like the idea of explaining where 245 came from, if that needs to be done. In the messaging about the way we are proposing to do it with the tiers and no income level for the top tier, that messaging needs to double down from TRPA about building community, and that these are valued people too, and all of those kinds of things, and that it's not, this effort is not solely laser focused on low income. Because that is the answer to that question. That is why we're doing this. That is why we don't cut it off lower. And so that message, it would have been helpful to Washoe County to have that already built in and a little bit more loudly put out there by TRPA. So I think it's not too late to do that. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. Does that sound right to you, Karen?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Hitch?
For the record, John Hitchcock, the city agrees with many of the comments that were laid out by Mrs. Jacobson. The city agrees with the Washoe County that we shouldn't have an income limit on achievable units. And we agree that there doesn't seem to be any evidence that these rental units actually been turned into luxury units. I mean, if you look at the rental units that were built using city units of use, those are being occupied by individuals that live and work in the basin. And our concern is that if you have the income limit plus the requirement to live in basin, then you're just decreasing the housing options in the basin.
Thank you, John. That's helpful. Final thoughts on this one before we go to the next?
An answer to the one question that we had to research.
Okay.
We do. Alyssa Bettinger for the record. So for both the California counties, they're the same for El Dorado and Placer. They're just slightly under 109,000 per year again, this is for a 3-person household in 2025. Douglas and Washoe are slightly lower at just under 100,000. Douglas is 98,000 a year and Washoe is 99,500.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hovering around the 100K mark for 3 folks. Okay, I think I'll move us on to the second one. That's
just one more on the first. You included information, Karen, Robert Ehrlich, talking about the size of the achievable units built so far, and that it did not change with the adoption of new requirements. And was that 2023 or something?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a scenario? Again, some folks have some concern that people who have a lot of money will take advantages. Can you provide some examples of how you think, or what would be an example of how one with what kind of size would we be talking about in terms of the types of things we might want to try to avoid incentivizing for in the absence of a income limit? I mean, what are the concerns that what type of things would be built under this category of achievable housing if we stay with this limit rather than the 245?
I don't know that I could say exactly what size. I mean, I do think the concern, I think it's really important to look at all the possible loopholes. I think the concern is that this wouldn't, if there's no, I do want to come back. We do have some ways that we look at size when the project applications come in, but I think the concern is that suddenly a bunch of wealthy people like doctors and lawyers, people who make much higher incomes would suddenly start using these units or encouraging builders to, builders would build for them. And then we would just be providing deed restricted housing for this group of people that doesn't really need it because they could afford housing on their own. And we don't really see evidence of that because most people who can afford a house do not want a deed restriction on their house if they can avoid it. So, so that's one thing, but potentially it could happen that this somehow drives a much higher income people coming to the basin and wanting these types of units. And I don't know that that's necessarily completely bad either, but we do have a requirement in the application for achievable. They need to specify the size of the units. And if it's significantly above the average size of achievable units, then the planner, they ask for a rationale for why it needs to be that big. Like they want to understand that is in our application. I don't know that we've had to do that yet because the units are still that have been proposed have been pretty small. But they can ask like, what is your goal with these units? Like, why do they need to be this big? So we have that option in the application process. So it's, not a fail safe, but it's one kind of check on the process.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, let's go to the second. We can. So this is an assessment of criteria to address potential site-specific impacts. I think, Karen, you said a lot of this happens at the project review level, and maybe through the environmental. If there's an environmental analysis, I'll just say for that discretionary project. Obviously, a lot of the key TRPA tenants will remain, things like coverage and BMPs and landscaping and soil stabilization, all those kind of good things are remaining. I don't know. Do folks have concerns about this? Is this adequately covered? Does anyone want to share anything? Garth?
Is it correct that each of the applications are still going to require an IEC for all projects, right? And these items are all covered within the initial environmental checklist.
These items are included within the initial environmental checklist. We do have a proposal in the policy package. So except for single family homes. Single family homes are exempt from that review. We have a policy proposal to look at up to a fourplex also being exempt from that review so that small multifamily would get the same benefit that single family does. So they could be exempt from it, some multifamily development. I mean, obviously, we have to evaluate that in the EIS. So yeah, potentially something else could come out of the EIS if there's the potential for impacts from that.
Just remember, a fourplex could be smaller than a lot of the houses built, say, in Incline Village.
Mr. Chairman, John Hester here.
Yep.
Just anecdotally, in discussing how to respond to this question, I said something like, well, I'm sure we have 62 or some number I made up criteria we look at. And I got in trouble because the permitting and compliance staff said, we have hundreds. And they started telling me, 194 here and this many there. And I was like, sorry, I just picked a number, but you can be assured, to your question, Garth, there are a ton of things that we reviewed projects against. It varies by project, but you guys know that. We're notorious, I think, for that in some.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. And I think that's one of the reasons why I made that statement is there's already a lot of review that's happening. So this almost seems a little duplicative to me, but thank you.
I agree. Yeah, we're staying within the growth caps and all those things. Did you want to comment, Hitch?
Yeah, the city agrees with tier-based staff approach on this. There's a need for additional criteria. I mean, we're already analyzing most of that under the current system.
Agreed. Yeah. Crystal, let's go to you.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I'd say Placer also agrees. I think, I think the analysis and the sort of the criteria that we have to measure projects against in the basin is probably, I would argue, the most complex in this nation. And so I on this one, I mean, I understand the importance to do the analysis, but I feel like the framework to do that is already there.
Thank you, Crystal. Final thoughts? I think we're feeling pretty comfortable with where we're at on this one, Karen. Let's go to 3. So additional height outside of town centers, I think you said this isn't being considered, right?
It's not being considered, except I do want to point out what Matt pointed out in their comment letter, that we do have a policy to sort of support local jurisdictions when they want to expand their town centers. Local jurisdictions can already expand their town centers, but there is a policy that we're looking at as to re-looking at the findings so that could we make it easier to expand your town center as long as you're incorporating infill development that, supports environmental goals.
Okay. We are, I'll just say El Dorado County is actually looking to potentially take advantage of this by creating a village center in Tahoma. That's in our proposal right now, in our draft area plan that's out on the street. So we can do that, or we can at least propose that. We'll see if we pass all the approval bars, but. Okay. Any thoughts on height, or should we go to number 4? Graham?
I was just gonna add on this one, just tracking the conversation here. It's to add as well, it's very similar, I think, to the previous one. And that these, whenever TRPA approves a project or a request from a local jurisdiction on a variance or additional height, I'm gonna call it a variance, but it's really kind of a code amendment there, but just that a project that wants more height, we really look at that in the site specific analysis. There is the code requires certain findings be made that involves looking at the scenic impacts to additional height or neighborhood compatibility in some cases. I think, as we all know, citing example, the hospital. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the proposed hospital project, the agency decided that additional environmental review was needed on that because there could potentially be significant impacts with the height. And sometimes those projects, then get specific mitigation measures or they dial back that height. So it's, I think on this one, just want to add that a lot of that, again, is still really built into the TRPA review process.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, I guess number 4. So incentives / programs to unlock the existing housing supply. I know certain jurisdictions do have incentive programs to encourage this, like the city and I believe Placer County, and I wish we did. It's a noble goal. Does anyone have any concern? I think we all agree this is a great idea. If a house is sitting there, let's try to use it. Acknowledging that we live in America and it's a piece of private property and the owner has rights and can do what they desire, but certainly a great way to earn some additional income, hopefully not turn it into a short-term rental and that we have to live next door to and help out a local. Eric.
A very quick personal anecdote. My nephew just got a job as a firefighter down in Mammoth and was concerned about where he was going to live because just like here, Mammoth really struggles with housing for locally employed people. And even his future colleagues before he moved out here were telling him to look in Bishop. That's where many of them live, and this is where you're going to have to find a spot. Well, there was an STR in Mammoth that decided it was too much of a hassle, too much work, and they converted it to a long-term rental, and he was able to grab it immediately. And so he and his fiance, 2 locally employed people, as firefighter, will be able to actually live in Mammoth because an STR converted back into a long-term rental. So it can happen, it does happen. And so the more we can do that here, the better.
You're giving us hope, Eric. Lucky guy. That sounds good. Karen, do you want to say something?
Yeah, before we move on from this, I do just want to add a little bit more context to some of the public comments. earlier in the proposal, reflecting what we heard from the public, we did hear some very specific ideas about ways to disincentivize short-term rentals. And throughout the process, we've heard an ongoing comment that we should also be disincentivizing large homes or vacation homes and short-term rentals. And we've had that in the proposal at various times in various iterations, but as we've gone through and constantly gone back and compared the proposal to our overarching housing goals or goals of the project, the goals of the project are to meet the housing need and to provide housing in the proportion needed of different income groups. It's not disincentivizing something might be one way that we get to it, but that's not a goal of the project. So in the policy package, we kind of reeled some of that language back to make sure that we're focusing on our actual goal. And as we do the analysis, if we find that there are, concrete impacts of short-term rentals or concrete impacts of vacation or of larger vacant homes that we can quantify, we may see some more specific regulations or impact fees, mitigation fees, come into play. But where we are now, we didn't feel like that was consistent with the goals and objectives to include that level of detail. So we may have been a little premature the way we included some of it in earlier iterations, but it's not completely out. It's just, aligned with the goals, the way we have the project worded now.
Thanks, Karen. Jason.
Jason Drew for the record. On that note, I know one of the questions when I was reviewing some of the material, and this question may not be able to be answered in the context of this specific topic, but it would be helpful, I think, for the group to, in this surrounds the idea of over the years, we have talked about the issue of because of commodities and because of the costs to get a house approved, the size of the houses have increased. And there have been discussions outside of this particular topic. I'm just wondering if you can summarize briefly what other things have happened or are in the works, because right now, if you went back several years under the system we had in place, it would cost you about the same in terms of process and fees to build a 5,000 square foot as it would be to build a 1,250 square foot house. What in the context of this, what other things are happening in order to address that? Because I agree with you that there may be things that need to happen outside of this specific topic to address incentivizing more reasonably sized family homes to be built.
So I'll give a couple of examples. I will say that pretty much every policy that's in the package, and there's probably over 20 individual ones, are oriented towards fixing that imbalance. So kind of reducing some of the costs for smaller homes, and potentially if we can show that there's impacts, adding that cost onto larger homes, but there has to be a nexus. Like one example is expanding the use of bonus units to affordable by design projects. So this would say, if you're building, for instance, an accessory dwelling unit or maybe a fourplex, that is the only restriction would be that it can't be used as a short-term rental. You could get a bonus unit for that, and that would save you, potentially $30,000 in development costs. So that's an example of one way that this proposal could significantly reduce the cost for smaller housing types. Another one is we have a proposal that all housing and all development needs to contribute proportionally to the housing needs. So if you're building an apartment building, you need to show that there's a mix of units in that apartment building that align with the housing need. And if you're not providing that, there would be an in lieu fee. So those are just a couple examples. There's more that I could talk about if you want me to name some more. But yeah.
No, appreciate that. That's helpful.
Our chair is back. I'm wondering if I can have the next question.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Karen, this is really good discussion, so thank you. I was just thinking back to the topic of, potential for loopholes, and now the potential to, I loved what you said about focusing on the goal of the program and not really broadening your scope and including a lot of disincentives for things that we might not want to see. And it's just kind of making me think, it seems like TRPA has its eye on monitoring the progress of the implementation of these different policies and seeing what its effects are, so that in the future, if our intent was to achieve this kind of outcome and we're not getting that outcome, we're short of the mark, or we're finding we're having this kind of outcome different instead, that there could be potential through monitoring, through enforcement, to make course corrections in order to get to that desired goal. I haven't really heard much conversation yet about monitoring, but it seems like it's part of it. I just wanted to know if maybe you had some thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. And monitoring and adaptive management is always part of our process. So I would say definitely yes. And I did want to mention, we do survey. We have a voluntary survey of all of our deed restricted units that we do every year to understand better how they're being used. Just slightly back to the point of not including disincentives in the policy package, that doesn't necessarily mean that the final package won't have some things that act as disincentives, because we will need to mitigate impacts. And so we'll be taking a new look, the most current data on what are the impacts of our land use pattern. So it could be that some types of homes that just had a flat fee before now have a graduated fee or something like that. So I think there's kind of multiple ways of addressing that, but yes, adaptive management is always part of it. And ongoing monitoring is part of this, but if you have specific suggestions for monitoring that you want to see, definitely let us know. I would say that it's built into this in terms of monitoring deed restricted properties, and there's some strengthened monitoring of PMPs and stormwater facilities.
Good question, Hillary. Thanks. Crystal, let's go to you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with the adaptive management approach. I think it's really important. And really do believe in this sort of, creating incentive programs to unlock housing supply. We're already doing that. Placer County's already doing a lot of that. As you noted, Mr. Chairman, at the top of this discussion, we've got several programs. Our STR program has been revamped over the years. We've got a Lease to Locals program, a workforce housing preservation program, and we significantly fund those programs through TOT dollars. So do believe that those programs are best handled by local jurisdictions, but perhaps there could be additional language in the code or in TRPA goals about local implementation of those types of programs to help unlock housing, but generally do support it. And just, I think that the adaptive management piece is important, and to always be looking for, what more could you be doing on the incentive side. That's it.
Good. Thanks, Crystal. Good points. Robert.
Robert Ehrlich for the record. Could you talk a little bit more about the decision not to include the feasibility of requiring the RUU and the TAU for short-term rental activity? Maybe you or council could explain some of the environmental, legal, or implementation implications that led to that decision.
I could start, and Graham may want to add on. So that was one of the ones where that was a proposal we'd heard from the public. So we did want to reflect that in our, documents that we're working on. But again, like our regulations, and so that the way it was written in the package was that if you have a short-term rental, that we would require both a residential unit of use and an additional tourist accommodation unit development rights. So it would require 2 development rights because it has these 2 different uses in a way. But our development rights are tied specifically to impacts such as transportation impacts, VMT impacts, and having the duplicate development right. We felt that basically we needed to analyze the impacts first before we could say that adding a development right that there would be an environmental nexus, because basically from what we've shown so far in our previous modeling, short-term rentals don't have dramatically different VMT or other impacts than a locally occupied home. So there wouldn't be that justification for adding that kind of layered requirement. So that's why we decided to take a step back on the exact wording of that.
Yeah, and I think this is Graham St. Michelle. I think that was a good answer. I think that I would just add that some of these types of topics, right, like they can get, some are a lot more challenging for an agency in terms of its implementation and its legal authority. And, you know, it doesn't mean that we don't have the authority or whatnot. These things can be gray areas, but it just becomes a question sometimes for the agency politically, and like whether it wants to embark on that sort of stretch of its role. You know, Ms. Jacobson was talking about kind of the local interplay that we have, and we operate as an agency here. It's, you know, 4 counties and a city, and we're a compact agency with 2 states. And we exist because everybody agrees to participate, right, in this. And so when you push your authorities on some of these sensitive issues, that can also just be a question of whether or not the agency wants to embark on that. So I don't think there's been any kind of like formal, oh, we don't have the authority to do this or whatnot. And as Karen mentioned, it's still something that we're probably exploring in some way.
Just John Hester, add to that. I believe it was around 2018, I might be off a year or two, that the issue of TRPA looking into its role, more of a role in STRs, was deferred by the governing board to our local government committee. And because each jurisdiction has different approaches, for example, you know, like to use Crystal's example, they collect transient occupancy tax and Tahoe business or business improvement district tax to pay for housing. If we were to say everybody else has to do that, that wouldn't work. So everybody said we have different STR. Some of them say if an STR, if you add an STR, you have to drop a hotel room. That's not something that's region wide. At the time, City of South Lake Tahoe had the voter initiative that said where they could go. So what our local government committee did say was put 3 criteria in the code for allocations. So we did, and then they are location, enforcement, and education. And so we ding local governments on allocations if they don't have those things in there for their short-term rental program. So that was as far as our board, kind of to Graham's point, our board felt like we should go at the regional level and then let everybody have their own versions of enforcement, education, and location decisions.
Thank you. I just thought that'd be useful to have that in the record.
Yeah, good discussion. Thanks. Final thoughts on number 4. Jim?
I just have one. I've been an owner of short-term rentals for about 6 years here at the lake, and this sounds great to unlock all those vacation homes, but I know from experience of having large vacation homes, very few people are interested in renting them out to locals or even converting them to STRs. I know there's 2 sides to that. Do we have any data on, like, for instance, in Washoe County, we know exactly how many STRs we have. Do we have any kind of large amount of information on how many we have in the basin, how many we could hope to convert? Because those are the most likely ones to convert to full-time rentals. Do we have data on that? Is there a way to get it?
I might turn to John Hitchcock to weigh in on this a little bit. We definitely have numbers of how many short-term rentals we have in each jurisdiction. The city quite some time ago did a study on how many short-term rentals could be expected to convert to local residences if the appropriate, regulations were put in place. And I think it showed through a survey that they did, it showed up to 10% could be converted. The city does have some real world experience with that while they had the short-term rental ban. And I know there was some data collected, but I understand it was actually kind of hard to collect that data, but that's kind of
Well, I mean, I think the county acted yesterday on I'm sorry, not the county, the city, a new ordinance. And for the city anyways, the maximum number of VHRs that are possible will be capped at 900 in residential zones. That doesn't take into account the ones that are in our tourist core and are not in our commercial zones, which count probably for another, well, probably 500 to 600 VHRs.
Yeah, we're going back to VHR land in the city. The opposite direction.
Yeah, I believe there's about 6,000 VHRs basin-wide, give or take. Yeah.
We have slightly less than 800 in El Dorado County, 750. We also have a cap of 900, but we have our 500-foot buffer around legally existing VHRs, which has now driven the number of VHRs that are allowed, not the cap. So every jurisdiction is doing it pretty differently. We've seen our numbers coming down. I'll take the silence maybe as we can move to number 5. Let's try it. Okay, this is on VMT. So encouraging additional strategies for the reduction of VMT. A few things are listed there. Again, this is somewhat of a local government or transit agency issue. I mean, TRPA obviously has their VMT threshold and the calculator for fees on projects, which we've talked about at our previous meetings. Do folks want to weigh in on this one? Okay. Let's see, Crystal. Very consistent today. Let's go to you. Crystal, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Oops. Having a little trouble here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I kind of made comments on all of these. So I just on this one, very similar to the last one, is that we're doing a lot of this already in terms of you know, putting together and implementing programs aimed at reducing VMT. And then funding those through our local dollars as well. So a lot of our TOT and TBID dollars go to, incentivizing workforce housing programs, but also programs aimed at reducing VMT. So again, I think that this is kind of one of those strategies that fits really good with the locals. So that would be my comment on that.
Agreed. Thank you.
Maybe this is Graham St. Michel, just to add on, just for the record and just for further discussion explanation, as Chair Ferry pointed out that TRPA does have a VMT threshold with a long-term VMT reduction goal, and there are milestones in the regional plan about how every 4 years there's a check-in and a need to hit reduction milestones along the way, with certain compliance measures that go into effect if those milestones aren't met. And so this is also one of those where it's like this type of work and effort is a much bigger endeavor than the cultivating community package that's moving forward. I think, as Karen mentioned, some of these e-bike share programs and those types of things. These are all important and things that the agency and local agencies around the basin are working on, generating funding for through the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan. And so again, just to give some assurance that this is like a much bigger effort and that it could, potentially still be looked at. Even all that said, through the EIS is any specific mitigations. We haven't, said that this isn't important or something that we're not looking at.
Thank you, Graham. Final thoughts? I think we're good to go to the last one, which is on parking. One spot minimum parking requirement. Karen talked about this. This is not a proposal. The local governments, or I think the way you said is the developer can put in one spot if they'd like. We know coverage is at a premium in the basin, and building large parking lots offsets the number of units you can build. So trying to provide a little more flexibility to a developer to do, say, a parking study or incentivize, fund some transit options or an e-bike rental program or something like that is an opportunity for a developer to try to get some more units and less parking space. So I'm comfortable with where we are, not going to a one minimum, but anyone want to weigh in? Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric Young, Washoe County. So parking is and has been a really difficult nut to crack for Washoe County. Our citizens need their personal transportation, and we don't see that going away anytime soon. But we fully understand the data behind what Karen mentioned and the costs of parking, the impacts of parking, not only for the cost of any given project, but for the additive impact of to the basin when we encourage parking in cars. So we recognize where TRPA is coming from very clearly. I mean, we can read the science and get it and talk to the developers and understand what they're telling us. But we have a citizen base in Washoe County that is really, really concerned about more development with no parking. And we're not completely convinced that every developer will say, oh, I know I need the parking, I'm going to provide some parking. We come across developers from time to time down in the meadows who would be tickled to not provide that because they know people need houses, and it'll be, well, you just have to figure that out, park in the street. Or just not provide enough, right? And so years in the future, then we have this problem. Why doesn't this place have enough parking? And they're coming to us for discretionary permits to add parking. This is a very difficult issue with two very legitimate sides of the coin. And so Washoe County is not going to ask for any changes. We took part in the working group. We fully support what the working group is proposing. It took a lot of time and effort to get there. But this isn't, parking is and will continue to be an issue in Washoe County. And we're going to have to really continue working to keep that balance for us between what we understand to be the impact of parking and more cars versus the impact of not enough parking for your community members and the jobs that they have and the things that they just need to do. So we're not asking for any changes. We appreciate the work that went into this, and we think it's almost certainly fine how it is, but we are concerned about parking in Washoe County. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. John?
For the record, John Hitchcock City, South Lake Tahoe. Yeah, we don't support this. We strongly believe that parking standards should be determined at the local level. And if a project, through a park analysis can show that they can get by with less parking, the city would support that. And actually, we did a quick study of the various, particularly Sugar Pine project in the South Shore, and the parking demand for Sugar Pine is like half a space per unit. So the project is currently developed and proposed is actually overparked. So.
Thanks, John. I see two hands online. Let's go to Ashley Cyber, and then Crystal will go to you.
Thanks, everyone. I don't usually weigh in quite as much on these types of topics here, but I think the parking piece especially, is one of the pieces that ends up flowing over onto onto National Forest land specifically. So there's definitely, I think, a recognition, you know, on the Forest Service from the standpoint of the, you know, physical parking. Literally, when people don't have a place to park, where do they park? They park on, you know, on the sides of the roads or on, you know, the empty lots. They park where they can. What I would say about this is that I don't necessarily have comments related to at what level, you know, these things should be approved at, whether it's local or sort of the this plan level. But what I would say is that there needs to be some sort of a recognition if it is being approved at the local level, like what those standards are that everybody's using to approve things. And you know, one parking spot per a unit, or, you know, per a house or whatever you're going to use there. You know, for those of us who do or have done urban planning elsewhere, it's actually very small. I mean, that's a small number of parking. A lot of places will require more than that. You know, in areas where they have the space, obviously, but it's definitely a concern that there would be somewhere baked in that there is some sort of minimum standard. I'm not sure if it's one space, you know, maybe it's a different number than that. But making sure that that actually is in there, because otherwise the impacts bleed outwards. But I would also say that this number here, however it ends up getting, you know, baked in, that number, you know, maybe there's other ways that that number could be adjusted then. Maybe there is a minimum, but instead there's a way to have exceptions or something like that that then get approved by something. But just having something in there, I feel like is necessary in order to make sure that this actually is a priority and that things are not then spilling out elsewhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Karen, isn't it true that for the deed restricted affordable housing, the standard is 0.75 spots per unit unless you do a parking analysis that proves it could be lower? Is that right?
That's correct for outside of town centers. So for outside of town centers, local jurisdictions cannot set a minimum that is higher than 0.75 per unit, unless there is a parking study that shows that there's, you know, not transit options or there's not alternatives. And then in the town centers, and this is only for deed restricted housing, that's the only place that TRPA has weighed in and said what local jurisdictions can or can't do with parking. Otherwise, we've completely left parking to the local jurisdictions. But in phase 2, for town centers, we said that local jurisdictions cannot set a minimum for deed restricted housing, but that they can ask the developer to do a parking study if they're going to come in with a number of parking spaces that's lower than what the local jurisdiction has as their standard for non-deed restricted housing. They do have to do a parking study to show that that's supportable, that people can take transit or bike, and that they're close enough to use those other methods.
Okay.
I guess maybe I will also just add one more thing that that is just, it's a symptom of the whole around the country, not just here, but related to transportation, parking, etc. Sometimes a few things get conflated, and I want to make sure that this group is just having these thoughts in the back of their head as these discussions move forward, that there needs to be a recognition that, you know, we're in an isolated area. So maybe people can take transit to go a lot of places, but nobody around here can take transit to go every place that they need. They need to get out of the basin everybody needs to get out of the basin on a regular basis. There's nobody that lives here that doesn't have to sometimes go out. There's not enough stuff here for everybody, services here. As well as just in general, you know, the ability to use transit to go someplace is awesome. But having that recognition that most, you know, families, you know, they are going to have a car and it has to be put someplace. So maybe they aren't using transit on a regular basis, but there needs to be that recognition that there is a little bit of a difference here. And a lot of these studies are using urban areas and things like that. And we need to keep that in mind when we're working through these parking things. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Crystal, let's go to you.
Yeah, thank you. So on this item, I would say I kind of echo Mr. Hitchcock's points and think that, on a case-by-case basis, when these projects are coming in, there's an ability for, the developers to do a parking analysis. So we kind of lean on that. I do think, in the town centers in particular, there's an opportunity for us to focus on transit options to get people around. And I would also just say that, I think a lot of our workers don't have cars. And so they really look to those transit options to get around and don't need parking all the time. So I think it is important to look at these projects as they come in on a case-by-case basis and try to, going back to the VMT item that we touched on, implement programs that incentivize transit and getting people around that don't have cars. So that's my comment on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Crystal. Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer Carr, for the record. I would echo concerns expressed by Ashley about the spillover effect. Yeah, like if there isn't parking, people will park because they will have a car. So then they're off pavement, they're on shoulders, they're potentially impacting stormwater runoff and water quality issues, which is, one of the reasons I sit here. I remember making comment on a project that was, I think, a zero parking project on the North Shore within the last, year or two. Again, echoing like what the analysis entails as to, with all due respect for folks that, think that, a family can get by with just transit. I mean, are there enough dentists? Are there enough pediatricians? Are there enough grocery stores? Can you get to all those things that you need as a family solely with public transportation? And if the answer to that is no, then we really need to be looking at parking from a holistic standpoint of what is available in the community. And maybe in South Shore, maybe you can get to all those things, but I would probably agree in Washoe, there may not be a dentist, or there may, not be a pediatrician, or there may not be, whatever you want to look at, and you need a car to get to, another part of the community or go down to the valley to get those services. So I think this, whatever the study entails, I think we need to make sure that they're comprehensive to not just the ability to get to a bus stop or whatever, but where does that bus then take you? And so, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Ellery.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ellery Stoller. I'll just pile on with Jennifer and Ashley. I agree with the potential for spillover effects, and the fact that as a basin, we're already struggling with limited parking. And another thought that I had too is that for deed restricted affordable housing or moderate housing, if there's limited parking supply, I wonder if like the property managers of apartment units would then charge for the parking, the on-site parking that they have, and then kind of counter our goal and make living in those areas less affordable. So it would be interesting to know if there is that happening, if people are charging for the limited parking on site. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
I have not heard of anybody charging for parking at a residential development in Tahoe. That doesn't mean that they couldn't, but I'm not aware of any.
Don't give anyone any ideas.
I know it happens in Reno.
Charge for everything, your bag, your little more leg room, your parking space. Eric?
this is another one of those issues, sort of like VMT, where it bleeds over to things that are not just the responsibility of the Tahoe Living Working Group. The group has to say something about parking. As we mentioned, it's one of the big themes in lowering housing costs. I mean, you couldn't have, it would be weird if the Tahoe Living Working Group came forward with a bunch of ideas that didn't include something about parking. It is one of the major things that you have to talk about when you're talking about the cost of housing. So, you know, I get where that's coming from, but in order to make it work, it's got to be more than just the Living Working Group. All of the effort that we put into developing transit, all of our big transit themes and transit concepts, if those don't blossom and happen, then this is a disaster. That transit has to happen for all of our plans. That's like the key fundamental thing for almost everything we talk about is, well, yeah, but transit. Well, yeah, but transit. It's got to happen, or else so many of our initiatives are doomed. And I'm sure many of you might be tired of hearing me say this, but it's more than just providing the lines and providing the money and getting the buses. It is a cultural shift. We don't live in a transit-oriented society. We can make the shift, we can do it, but it takes real effort to market it, not only just make it available and pay for it, but to get people to want to do it. And I don't know how many of you are going to turn on your televisions when you go home tonight, or when you watch a ball game maybe this weekend, but I guarantee you, you will see one television commercial after the other for you to go out and buy a personal vehicle because of the freedom it gives you, because of your ability to drive up to Lake Tahoe on your own with your buddies. How great would that be? Get your own car because of all these things you can do. You will see 5 of those advertisements tonight on TV. That's who we are. And until we do something about that and start convincing people around here that the transit opportunities that are available are what they really want, and that's better than the choice to hop in your car with your buddies, we're not going to make the transition. We have to put more effort into the cultural and social transition, not just the capital improvements. And I hope we can do it. I'm not against it. I just think we're swimming upstream on this, and it's a concern because transit is so fundamental to our goals. Thank you.
Good point. Agreed. Thought you were going to say drug commercials. Oh my gosh. No, let's not. I'm going to try to finish this up, but I do see Kate's hand raised online. Let's go to you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate Morales, O'Neill, Douglas County. So Douglas County right now is in the middle of a couple big projects. We are updating our Title 20, and we're also creating the Tahoe Douglas Area Plan. I know one of the things that staff is looking at with our overall update is parking, like in minimizing the amount of parking required in both our commercial and residential districts, because it exacerbates costs for developers, which then gets passed down to the homeowner. With that being said, however, we are concerned as we're looking at developing the Tahoe Douglas Area Plan with the larger, the phase 2 housing projects. And I have been on record bringing this topic up, and parking is a concern. And it's more of a concern from the county's perspective that when you don't have a car, how are you getting out in an emergency situation if there is a wildfire? We've had public comment from our TDAP, and our residents and community members within Douglas County are very concerned about wildfire and large housing projects coming into the area. The county is all for the workforce housing and these type of developments, but the concern is limiting the parking and not requiring parking. How does that family get out? And who's driving these buses and where are they staged and so on and so forth. I know one of the things we are looking at is implementing for these type of projects and project specific when they come forward to the county is requiring an additional emergency preparedness evacuation plan so that that project can be looked at specifically. And that would be one of the things that would be addressed. So from that standpoint, I agree with others that are concerned about not having at least one spot per unit. And I think that's more of our concern and listening to our community members is that what do we do in an emergency situation and how are these people getting out? So I think that's something that will definitely have to be addressed. So we are trying to implement things within the Tahoe Douglas area plan to help mitigate those type of situations. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Kate.
if I can add a little staff perspective to this, having practiced urban planning in a number of jurisdictions. I want to make sure we're not conflating a bunch of things. One is we don't have new single family subdivisions where you're going to have somebody with a house that can't have parking. Moreover, this is only for deed restricted housing. There's not that much of that going in. And having worked in a city and a county, we had variation within our jurisdiction of our parking standards. They varied by use. They also varied by infill area. And we had infill redevelopment, developers who did infill development come to us and say, we know better than you what we need for parking. You don't need to even give us a parking standard. We will propose what works for our development in the market because we're not going to build something we can't rent because we don't have parking. So couple those things with, do you really want the regional agency saying what your minimum parking requirement should be across the board? I think you probably would be wiser to leave it to the locals. And again, we're not saying developers can't exceed the 0.75 for deed restricted or whatever in the town centers. We're just saying that the local jurisdiction shouldn't require it. So I think it's a very, very limited, the way it's proposed now is very, very limited and leaves a lot of discretion to project by project in local government. And I would caution you on advocating for something that takes away that flexibility, especially if it's done at the regional level. Just having practiced at the local level, I think there's a lot of flexibility you're taking away. And again, it's only for deed restricted housing. So just something for the discussion.
Thanks, John. Yeah, agreed. It's a small subset of what we're talking about here. Okay, how's everyone feeling? Final thoughts before we go to public comment? Can we do it? Let's do it. Okay. We're going to go to public comment. This is on item 4A. Excuse me. We'll go first to members in the room. Please come to the podium, turn the microphone on and state your name for the record. We will then go online. For members of the public joining us via the Zoom webinar, this is your opportunity to publicly comment on item 4A. You can either use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or dial *9 on your telephone. You will be unmuted by a TRPA staff member. And we will go into the room. Good morning.
Good morning, Advisory Planning Commissioners and staff. My name is Sophia Heydrich. I'm the Advocacy Director for Mountain Area Preservation. I'd like to start my comment by thanking staff for agendizing the map settlement points today and to you all for having this discussion. There have been a number of conversations sort of around the settlement points, but never a specific opportunity to really hash them out or dive into the details. So we really appreciate the TRPA sort of kicking that off. I did submit a detailed comment letter yesterday. I'd like to highlight a couple of key points here. And as a brief side note, unfortunately, not every member of the working group got to participate in every small group discussion. Otherwise, maybe some of these topics would have come up during that process. One, we would love to see the TRPA require a tourist accommodation unit for every short-term rental. There has been at least some support for this in every cultivating community forum that we participated in. Would love to see that included in the environmental review, at least to have more information about it. 2, we would love to have a Tahoe Living Working Group strategic session focused on VMT reduction strategies. This has been talked about as sort of potential mitigation to future policies, but never as a standalone programmatic element. 3, while there is no proposal for additional height outside of town centers, there is a proposal to support expanding town center boundaries, which would effectively allow for additional height outside of existing centers. So we do feel as though a conversation around refining criteria for that additional height is warranted. And then finally, from our perspective, an income cap on achievable housing is really important. The existing definition is problematic. As you've all seen, the TRP's latest housing needs assessment shows us that over 60% of the need is for affordable and moderate housing, with 26% of the need for those earning between 120 and 245% of AMI. We are thrilled to see a tiered approach in phase 3, whereby affordable and moderate get greater incentives than achievable. Unfortunately, phase 2 didn't do that, as you know, and now we're seeing that play out. We actually met with a developer in the North Shore of a mixed-use project recently, and there's an achievable housing component. We asked whether they would consider incorporating some affordable and moderate units to better serve the future workforce of that project and that community. And the response was, why would we build affordable and moderate housing if the incentives are the same as achievable? It doesn't make sense. You should take this up with the TRPA. So here we are. Economically, it doesn't make sense, and we knew that. The concern is that these achievable units won't be affordable to the local workforce and that there may be loopholes, especially without 100% deed restriction auditing. We've actually seen that happen in Truckee. There's an example in my comment letter. Please take a look at it. We have the data. Let's be intentional and thoughtful about who exactly these incentives are intended to serve. In Truckee, achievable housing is up to 180% AMI because that's the missing middle there. That's what makes sense. That's what doesn't pencil given current market conditions and isn't covered by other programs. So let's figure out what makes sense in Tahoe, and it will be different for each different jurisdiction, but I know we have the data and that we can do it if there's a willingness to do so. And I think it's important for building trust and transparency with TRPA and also for meeting the goals of the cultivating community process. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Other folks in the room? Come on up. Hi, Shay.
Hi, Shay Navarro, TRPA staff. I just had a quick comment. I really enjoyed the discussion around parking and just wanted to ask if the study considered any programs like city car share, where for those that aren't familiar, those are systems where there's one car that's shared by many people that people pay into versus having the expenses of registration and maintenance for one car per person, so that some vehicles available when people have to go out of the basin once a month or however frequently they need to do so. And they're quite common in more urban environments. So just thinking about that, usually the car's parked somewhere publicly for the people that prescribe or participate in the program can have access to it. So just as a way to bridge the transition potentially. Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. Hey, Gavin.
Good morning. Excuse me, Gavin Feiger, Policy Director at Keep Tahoe Blue. Our real focus with the housing policies is around coverage. So I'll talk a little bit more. That's not in this agenda item, but I'll bring it up in the next agenda item. But for this one, parking, this is something that Keep Tahoe Blue, we've been really focusing on as part of our transportation problem and solution in Tahoe for a long time. There's, you can look at it from both sides, like, yes, we need to build more parking now so we don't have a problem in the future. Well, I would claim we have a problem right now, the future, from when we built mountains, thousands and thousands of parking spots that we do not need at the Casino Core and North Shore. Kings Beach has twice as much parking and half the commercial floor area as Truckee. Arguably, there's enough parking. So anyway, you could go back and forth, but you hear from your constituents. So I'll pivot a little bit and talk about my story. I moved to Tahoe without a car about 15 years ago. Lived here for 6 solid years without a car. Started sharing one with my girlfriend, who is now my wife. We have a kid. We then shared a 2001 Honda Civic for about 6 years and finally bought a Subaru. We do have that car still. We use it, half the days in the winter, maybe once a week in the summer, and we could very easily go without it. I live in South Lake Tahoe, but not in a town center. And there's a lot of people like me. I know I have a lot of friends that don't have cars, that share one car. And there are a lot of people that have 2 cars and 3 cars and need them all or think they need them all. So I think John Hester put it really well. This is not for everybody, but if I could have lived here and paid less for a place that did not have a driveway and I didn't have to shovel my driveway for a car I didn't have, I would have loved that for a long time. And I know, and I really do know there's a lot of people like me. So I think, thinking this isn't for everybody. These are parking minimums, not maximums. You really can still build as much as you want, and developers build a lot of parking in Tahoe. I see almost every project go through all the cities and county and TRPA, and they max out parking. Every developer does. So I don't see this as a problem, but a path towards a much more sustainable and right-sized future for parking in Tahoe. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning.
Rob Olson. I'm with the Tahoe Living Working Group, Phase 3. I'm live in the North Shore. Professionally, I'm an architect, contractor, and actively involved in our own development projects, working with Phase 2 amendments and hopefully Phase 3 for workforce housing. So I kind of look at these as how they apply to real world scenarios, like what's going to actually happen. And no one is going to be having like a wolf in sheep's clothing in my mind on like doing a deed restriction to have a market rate project that's supposed to be, workforce housing. That's just like not even people with workforce housing residents want a deed restriction. So why would someone that could get around that by just paying a little bit more do a deed restriction? So I think the income cap, and also Crystal's spot on with like what it takes to live in Tahoe, and the AMI table is set by the whole county, and each county, most of that area is just a sliver of Tahoe. And with AI, what is the industry going to be looking like in 5 years, let alone a 50-year deed restriction? We have no idea how AI might impact AMI tables in the future. So let's not put a cap on it. There's also, I think more incentives are great, but I don't feel like the marketplace will ever return to a point where the existing stock could solve our problems. So we do need to make sure we keep the options available for redevelopment and development. Multimodal transportation. I know TRPA mostly looks at VMT in the basin, but when we're generating more workforce housing in the basin, that can decrease the trip within the basin, but it's exponentially impactful outside the basin. People coming from Sparks, Reno, Minden, you name it. We need to be looking at VMT in my mind in total, like how housing could really help that. Parking, we don't need a minimum. We need maybe a maximum for all the points that people have stated. I think we enjoy our cars and we like it, and we want to put on our belief system about cars onto other people. And I don't think that's fair. Much like, my wife and I sold a car when we moved here. We only had one car. We used it only once a week. We did not like shoveling that car out when we had to, so sometimes we had to walk to work, which was across the river. And anyways, so, there is so much financial burden on young people trying to get going in life, and to have that, like, oh, you can have a car, or like, I don't think those commercials are good. I don't think we should be encouraging people to change their phone every 2 years too, right? Those commercials are out there. They're there to sell us on something that we probably don't need. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I'm laughing, sorry. Anyone else in the room? Okay. All right, we're feeling good. Catherine, let's go to public comment online, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 3 hands raised online so far. First hand up is John Falk. John, please unmute to make your comment.
Okay, thank you very much. John Falk, Legislative Advocate for the Taos Sierra Board of Realtors. Thanks for the opportunity. I know that the group has been doing a really heavy lift on each phase. Phase 1 and Phase 2 show it. I was involved deeply in Phase 1, to some extent in Phase 2, and Phase 3 and 4 are going to get harder and harder, unfortunately, as you tackle more debatable topics. But what I wanted to focus on in my brief commentary today is the fact that we really need to do 2 things. We need to ensure that we are using words with the intention that the general public uses them, incentives versus disincentives. When you talk about incentives and then you add anything with the word deed restriction in it, you've really created a very, very powerful disincentive. And I understand that the deed restrictions are the anchor to so many programs. And I use anchor in the most derisive way possible, meaning they weigh it down, they pull it down, they draw it back, they reduce its attractiveness. I'm not saying that there's not a place for it at any point in any time, but I am saying that relying on deed restrictions, in my opinion, is ill-advised because especially if you don't do what it needs to be done, which is my second point, which is to bifurcate the for rent and for sale segments of the market when you're talking about achievable housing. When you're talking about what people need in the basin, there are two distinct sets of people looking for housing: people that are looking to buy and people that are looking to lease. And if you don't bifurcate those, you're going to end up creating policies that are either too broad to have any power or too narrow to have any applicability to one side or the other, the for rent or the for sale side. So I think it's going to be critical to bifurcate those two segments of the market as you move forward. And I would also suggest that focus on the big issues. Issues like STRs, in my opinion, are a de minimis point. They always have been. We are a outdoor recreation based economy. A lot of second homes always have been. And if STRs are restricted, prohibited, whatever, in any way made less attractive, what that does is it really just lessens the economic opportunities and increases the chasm between the haves and the have-nots. The haves will have their home and let it sit vacant. The have-nots will be forced to sell their home because they don't have the opportunity to augment their income. And so STRs, all the horror stories, they're out there, but it's usually a few bad actors that need to be dealt with. And that's through regulatory measures to deal with bad actors, not regulatory measures to limit STRs. So with those comments, I would leave the rest until it's fleshed out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
The next hand raised is Ann Nichols. Ann, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, almost good afternoon. Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. I'd love to know who came here by car and who didn't. I hope that Gavin came by transport, by public accommodation, but who knows? And, the parking thing, let's use real world, the Tahoe East Shore Trail. People are parking all over the community because there's not enough parking. We do these these attractions and don't provide parking, get people from out of the area. The Kings Beach housing, deed restricted in Kings Beach. They're parking all over the roads because each family needs 2 cars to go around and do their jobs. And I think this is just delusional and aspirational that we think we can get away from the car on North Shore when everything that we need is so far away. And then, the achievable projects, nobody's going to do that. Well, Rob's Chalet Blanc, he's going to do achievable housing, no limit. The 39 degrees north, 64 units, all achievable. Neptune Investment, all achievable. Why would anyone do anything with a income restriction? And then, rich people aren't going to do this kind of thing. Well, in Aspen, it's $2,000 to $3,000 a square foot. I'm a realtor for 50 years, so I know how this goes. And, this is only going to cause more high-end, maybe smaller, but high-end units. And there's no, at least use the Nevada definition, which is 150% of the average median income. Lombardo's definition. I mean, this is just, and as far as the cap on development, guys, I've gone round and round with Karen Fink. They do it per unit, not population, and the conversions don't need development rights. You can go from a hotel room, or a motel room to a 6,000 square foot penthouse. So don't fool yourselves that there is a cap on development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann.
The next hand raised is Andrew Ryan. Andrew, please unmute to make your comment.
Hey, everybody. Andrew Ryan here, calling in from up here in North Tahoe and Kings Beach. I think the thing that's striking to me when parking comes up is that I think the sensationalism over any change to the code is pretty unwarranted. We've had 40 years of auto-focused development. So that's the reality that we're living in. That's the TV commercials you see. It's that auto-normative speak that you hear that no one could survive without a car. There's just, in reality, if you get out of sensationalism, there's not a real risk to trying something different. We can pivot back when the Armageddon comes of one too few parking spots. We're in the other realm of the phase where every decision is made for the automobile. Part of being a leader, and if you've chosen to serve your public by sitting on the Advisory Planning Commission, is to test those normatives, that auto normativity, and say, will the sky fall if we were so bold as to set a parking maximum over a parking minimum? I don't think it will. And I think we heard some sensational comments saying that it would. You can try it, incrementally if you can set a parking maximum for 10 or 15 units, try there. At least move the ball, try something. But to act like the change is going to be so drastic that our lives are going to materially change after so much focus on the automobile, I think is misplaced. So I would encourage you to try something new, be a little bold. Let's see what happens. I promise you the sky will not fall from thinking outside of the box. And then I'll just pivot from that to, the comment about achievable units. I think what we're seeing, and again, I think this is a space that we need to, actually have some units built to know more. But I do think the comments brought up about 39 degrees north up here, where we're allocating achievable units to mostly one bedroom and studios, should be eyebrow raising. We don't want to use the units that can maybe serve that missing middle the best on studios. So I appreciate your time. Please consider these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
And the last hand raised is Sharon Kerrigan. Sharon, please unmute to make your comment.
Hi, yes, this is Sharon Kerrigan. I am currently serving on the Tahoe Living Working Group as the real estate representative. I am the executive vice president for the South Tahoe Association of Realtors. And I wanted to speak quickly on the item regarding looking at the short-term rentals, or what we call vacation home rentals in the South Lake Tahoe. On the item of considering TAUs, it doesn't really make sense to require TAUs, and here's the reason, is that short-term rentals are very fluid. So this is a residential use, and it depends on the buyer who then owns the property. How are they going to use the property? Are they going to live in it full-time, long-term? Are they going to use it as a vacation home? Do they choose to short-term rent it? They may choose to do that for a few years and then move in full-time. They may choose to rent it long-term. They may choose to rent it seasonally. And we want to allow for that. And so requiring someone to obtain a TAU and then pull that out of the stock that TRPA has for these commodities, it just really doesn't make sense in terms of managing that use. We also want to encourage TRPA to retain that stance to ensure local jurisdictions have ordinances in place to manage and regulate these, but to continue to allow each local jurisdiction to find the way that works best for them in terms of regulation and managing it. And then the last thing is talking about the data. There is not a ton of data that exists at this point. Like Karen Fink mentioned, there may be some in the city of South Lake Tahoe, but a lot of it, we just don't have a multiple listing service, unfortunately, for rental units. there may be an effort to pull some aggregate data. We could try to work on that. There is actually a grant process in place with the associations of realtors to look at doing a study that may help inform us. But at this time, we are not seeing a huge impact of short-term rentals on actually pulling out of the long-term rental housing stock. And that is to the point of another speaker. A lot of these are luxury properties, and it just doesn't make sense. It's not something that's affordable for someone in the workforce. And so those are my comments today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sharon.
And Mr. Chair, there are no more hands raised to comment.
Thanks, Catherine. We'll close public comment, bring it back to APC staff. Anyone want to respond to any of the public comment, or we feeling okay?
Sure, I could briefly respond to, well, I don't have a great answer to Shay's comment, just wanted to acknowledge the suggestion about city car share. And I think that's a private, generally private, but there may be references to it in the regional transportation plan.
Great, thanks, Karen. Okay, we don't need a motion on this, I don't believe. So this is kind of a receive and file, and hopefully you heard some valuable insights today from us and the public. Graham, do you want to close with anything?
Just Graham St. Michelle. Because there was a settlement agreement involved in this, and I just really want to thank APC and as well as MAP. I see Sophia left, but just for the record, we really appreciate on behalf of staff getting their comment letter, and these topics being included was enable us to have this discussion, provide a forum for this. And I think it's just like to see all that participation from APC members of the public is, and again, thanks to MAP. I would encourage, if you hadn't looked at the letter that they sent, to do that. Obviously, these policy packages will be coming back through APC in the future. So I think all of this just really helps build our, consideration of these topics.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, let's tie a bow around it. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I'll move us on to item 4B, which is a presentation on the process and design standards for area-wide stormwater / complete streets infrastructure. Information on this item can be found on page 87 of your packets. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hester and Shay Navarro to speak on this
Thank
item.
you, Mr. Chairman. John Hester here. I just want to provide a little context. A number of times we've talked about the fact that we are encouraging area-wide stormwater retrofits, if you want to call them that. Most recently in phase 2, that came up as an option. And a lot of people have said, sounds great. How do we really make it happen? Because it is a process. And so one of the reasons we put this together was to meet with local governments and provide this information. We have done so. We met, for example, with Washoe County Manager and Assistant County Manager. We've got a working group Shay will tell you about a little bit, but we wanted you all to know, just for general information, how this is going to can get implemented and is being implemented. The other thing I want to provide as context, and I'm sure I'll probably be a little bit redundant with what Shay's saying, is, but if you back up and look at the whole basin and look at the history of what we've tried to do on water quality, you know that the point sources of pollution, in other words, those things that go into a pipe, have been dealt with by the Porter-Cologne Act, which requires, on the California side, all wastewater to be pumped out of the basin and treated outside the basin. Nevada, the governor's office did an executive order. So point sources of pollution have been dealt with state-of-the-art practices before TRPA, frankly. Non-point sources, you may be familiar or have read, which I have several times, a guy named Bailey's report. He was a Forest Service employee on how to manage the basin, the non-point sources, how to manage the basin to reduce erosion into the lake and to protect water quality where it wasn't something that was going into a pipe, where it was a non-point. So that's like runoff from streets, runoff from urban areas, runoff in the forest. And if you read that report, you'll see that for undeveloped land, the Forest Service, which is, roughly undeveloped land is roughly 90+% of the basin. The whole idea of managing coverage makes a lot of sense. But if you look at the first part of that report, he said in urban areas, you may want to consider other systems and infrastructure designed to deal with runoff. So as you also know, and back to our growth management caps, land subdivision has been prohibited in the basin since 1987. So we are not creating new lots and new subdivisions that would be putting in modern stormwater systems with curbs and gutters and collecting that water and treating it in different kinds of green infrastructure, detention basins and things like that. But we have all of this urban development that was pre-1987 that was developed predominantly without those systems. So really I know I'm kind of doing a 101 thing here, but what we're really trying to do is figure out a way to address the urban upland areas, non-point source pollution, to get beyond where we're getting with individual parcel BMPs, because that frankly is what you're going to need over the long term to do what the total maximum daily load permits and MOUs allow local governments and state departments of transportation to do. So that's a long introduction to what Shay's going to show you, but we have actually thought out and worked with the local governments the process on getting from what we have now to a way we can start and continue to develop these systems. So with that long rambling introduction, I'll give it to Shay, who I know will give a much better and more concise presentation than I can.
All right, thank you, John, and almost good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the APC. I'm happy to be presenting on a water quality topic, given many of your backgrounds and experience. And we know protecting Lake Tahoe's water quality has always been central to TRPA's purpose, our formation, and to that end, the agency has set forth numerous policies and regulations to protect water quality, including requiring stormwater BMPs on developed properties to infiltrate runoff and prevent sediment and nutrients from reaching the lake. I'm Shay Navarro. I'm TRPA's Watersheds and Water Quality Program Manager, and today I'm going to be talking to you about an alternative way for properties to meet TRPA's BMP requirements, and that's through area-wide water quality treatment or regional treatment for stormwater. And we're also going to discuss how stormwater treatment can be integrated with other features such as complete streets so that improvements can provide multiple benefits for both water quality and things like active transportation. This is an information item only. There's no formal action required, but we welcome input and we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. Next slide. So what is area-wide treatment and why is it important? Area-wide treatment uses more of a watershed scale approach to identify opportunities for stormwater management versus parcel by parcel. It's an important alternative because in a lot of situations, there are conditions found on site that limit properties' abilities to actually meet TRPA's infiltration requirements, such as high groundwater or bedrock. Examples of this are like the Tahoe Keys neighborhood or Cave Rock. And parcel BMPs also, they only extend to the parcel boundary. And oftentimes there's quite a bit of space between where the property ends and where the street begins. And that can often lead to large swaths of the public right-of-way being unimproved and often sources of sediment. Also, not all parcels are created equal. Certain parcels have higher pollutant loads like gas stations versus residential properties, and where you're located in the watershed in proximity to the lake or water bodies makes a difference in terms of what kind of impact you're going to have. For urban areas, as John was mentioning, some neighborhoods have more uses and more needs, like on-street parking or sidewalks or more space on each parcel to support housing, whereas other areas are more rural and more dispersed. And in those locations, parcel BMPs maybe work great. But area-wide treatment really provides that needed flexibility so that we can provide for these other needs while also getting to the same or better water quality treatment. Public water quality projects also can treat runoff collectively, both from the right-of-way and private properties, and that facilitates maintenance. It's a lot easier for local government public works departments to go out and perform maintenance rather than following up with thousands of individual properties and making sure that their BMPs are being maintained. I'm specifically talking about infiltration BMPs, a lot of times source control BMPs, which are those to stabilize sediment sources. Once they're installed, they don't need a lot of maintenance, but infiltration BMPs can need a lot of maintenance. And then, as I said before, area-wide treatment provides opportunities for multiple benefits. So when looking at stormwater treatment, you can also look at other things like active transportation, SEZ restoration, parking, wildlife benefits, things like that. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about the different opportunities and process to implement area-wide treatment. The process hasn't been well understood, so we're going to go over that today. We're going to look at the different components of area-wide treatment, and as well as TRPA's efforts to develop detailed drawings or typicals for stormwater infrastructure that can also support complete streets and add those to the BMP handbook. Lastly, we'll turn it over to you for questions and discussion. As I said before, there's no formal action, but we definitely want to hear your input and suggestions. Next slide. So TRPA's code really provides 3 areas that allows for area-wide treatment. The first is in Chapter 60, TRPA's water quality chapter, which allows for alternative BMPs when there are special circumstances where infiltration isn't possible. So I already talked about things like high groundwater or bedrock like Tahoe Keys and Cave Rock, but there can also be situations like limitations of parcel boundaries. So for example, in the city of South Lake Tahoe, the Harrison Avenue project treats runoff collectively from a lot of private properties because many of the urban commercial properties, their parcel footprint is the footprint of their building. So they didn't have any space to be able to install parcel BMPs. So those are some situations where the special circumstances section of Chapter 60 has been applied for area-wide treatment. And in 2012, with the regional plan update, TRPA expanded the allowance of area-wide treatment to not just be in situations where infiltration isn't possible, but to allow it anywhere as long as greater or equal water quality benefit could be demonstrated. They also allowed funding mechanisms for local governments to collect fees in lieu of parcels infiltrating their runoff on site. The requirements are all covered in Chapter 13 area plans, and they also include that area-wide treatments have to be in place and functioning before properties can participate in the area-wide program. And lastly, Chapter 30, our land coverage, provides provisions for more coverage for affordable and workforce housing if there is a stormwater collection and treatment system that is maintained by the local government, which area-wide supports the development of. Next slide. So this goes over the process to implement area-wide treatment. The first step looks at modeling using the pollutant load reduction model to evaluate whether treatment provides greater or equal water quality benefit. It determines whether the treatment that's already on the ground is going to get us there, or if additional treatment is needed to provide that greater or equal benefit. Once that's determined, if additional treatment's needed, then a conceptual level plan, typically at the watershed level, is developed to determine where additional treatment is needed and how much. And the PLRM is an iterative process that works in conjunction with the conceptual plan as it's developed. The implementation plan is more permit level design and engineering. This is also where operation and maintenance is addressed. Any fees, in lieu fees like we discussed, changes in coverage, as well as any plans for interim treatment to really bridge the transition from parcel by parcel to area-wide treatment, given that Chapter 13 says that it must be in place and functioning before properties can participate. Then we have TRPA approval. This can occur at the staff level or other, depending on the project. And then documentation to demonstrate that we're meeting the code is collected and updated in the BMP database so that we have a sense of each parcel's role in whether it's in an area-wide or needing just parcel BMPs. Next slide. So for the first step, the pollutant load reduction model, this is consistent with the TMDL. It was developed to evaluate pollutant loading in catchments and strategies local jurisdictions use to reduce those loads in order to meet the requirements of the TMDL on both the California and the Nevada side. And we use this to basically demonstrate if what is proposed provides greater or equal water quality benefit. It is typically very conservatively developed in that we look at what the water quality benefit would be if all parcels in the area met TRPA's BMP requirements. As we know, compliance is kind of hit or miss. So we would be evaluating if everyone met those requirements. And then we also develop it to build out. So for example, if housing is at play, we would evaluate what would be the runoff if every single multifamily property took advantage of that and expanded their coverage out to the maximum of what was allowed by the requirements. We know that's not going to happen, but it gives us some good sideboards to make sure that we're meeting that greater or equal water quality benefit. And it also takes into consideration the type of treatment and the location of where it's found in the watershed. Okay, next slide. So from that, if additional treatment is needed, then there's the development of a conceptual plan for that additional treatment. This is not just showing where infiltration can occur, like basins or vegetated swales or things like that, but it can also be a plan for multiple benefits and address things like source control, that unimproved road shoulder. Often that can be integrated to provide multiple benefits like providing stabilized parking, SEZ restoration, active transportation, trail connections, and wildlife benefits. And once that is complete, next slide, we move to implementation. So again, permit level plans and engineering. This is where we address operation and maintenance, any fees, changes to coverage, as well as that interim treatment to bridge the transition to area-wide. With respect to funding, recently Douglas County created a stormwater utility to help fund maintenance. This is allowed in Nevada, but has limitations on the California side with Prop 218. That really limits how local governments can collect fees for stormwater, but TRPA's code provides a mechanism, an alternative mechanism to actually do that because those fees are in lieu of a requirement that we have for parcel BMPs. And there's a variety of ways to collect fees, either through community facility districts, assessments, or a connection agreement. Flexibility really allows each situation to implement what works best for it. And all of those things are figured out and submitted at this implementation level. Next slide. Then we have TRPA's approval. Again, it's different levels of approval depending on the situation. So an area-wide plan could be approved and permitted at the staff level, but if it's part of a larger housing project, that could go to the board depending on the size of that and if there's any coverage changes. So it really depends on the situation. One example of that could be Dollar Point, for example. If that moves forward and has an area-wide treatment affiliated with it, it would come to the board. Next slide. And this just shows what our BMP on LT Info, the parcel tracker, what the BMP information shows and how we track whether a property is within an area-wide treatment location and whether that person is actually participating. So we have the plan name and if they're a participant, because some people may already have parcel BMPs and don't want to participate, even if they lie within an area-wide treatment location. So as those documents are developed, we can attach them to the different parcels in the BMP database. Next slide. So we do have a lot of existing plans that are active and in place, which include the Tahoe City Wetlands, Cave Rock. There's a number around the basin, but many of them are in the city of South Lake Tahoe and they use different funding mechanisms. We also have some that are in planning phases. The Mountain to Marina has the conceptual plan completed. We're also doing conceptual planning in the Tahoe Keys, and then just recently secured funding for Tahoe RCD to start pollutant load reduction modeling for some watersheds in Placer County to evaluate what's needed for them to establish area-wide treatment. Next slide. So one part of the implementation plan are details or typicals that are components of the stormwater treatment system. And we wanted to expand what typicals and detail drawings TRPA has to help prepare with those plans, as well as to look at where are there opportunities to combine infrastructure with complete streets. Next slide. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about a detailed drawing or typical. It basically is a detailed drawing of a component of a stormwater system. And we house these in our BMP handbook. Next slide. So these, when an implementation plan, this permit level and in design and engineering is being developed, these typicals are used within this plan set. And next slide. And to support this effort, TRPA convened a working group of TRPA staff, stormwater and public works staff from the local governments in the basin, as well as we engaged NCE as a consulting engineer to help further this effort. And the purpose of this group is really to compile a menu of existing detail drawings to see what's out there and then identify and prioritize what additional drawings we may need to add them to the BMP handbook. Next slide. So TRPA did a precursory evaluation and came up with 22 different details that we thought were appropriate and that we have in various formats. Some are scans off of paper plans, some are in AutoCAD format. We presented these to the working group. Next slide. We also identified gaps and talked about infrastructure that we liked, but we don't have details for. So these could be things like perforated pipes that are underneath pervious pavement and connect to the storm drain. Pervious pavers both in front of the curb and behind the curb. We have some examples there where the pervious pavement is behind a flush curb and connected to the storm drain with a pervious pipe underneath it. We also have pervious pavers in front of the curb that are part of the road shoulder that allow for infiltration. But then if those get clogged, it flows through a DI and then to a linear infiltration basin behind it before it's connected to the storm drain and goes out to the lake. As well as, you know, we didn't have a lot of complete street features. So that was something that we asked for. And thinking also about Tahoe appropriate designs for, you know, dealing with our winter climate and traction abrasives, but also the TMDL and what makes the best sense in terms of meeting our pollutant load reductions for fine sediment and nutrients. Next slide. So one example that we came up that we felt was needed, this is an intersection crossing. So this combines active transportation with stormwater treatment. Bulb outs shorten the crossing length between in the intersection to make it safer for people to cross the street. We have a flush curb that allows for the plow to make it around without taking out the curb, and then water would sheet flow into an infiltration area. We have a boulder parking barrier to prevent people from getting into that infiltration area. We would be using Tahoe appropriate vegetation. So that's one example of a combined stormwater complete street detail that we brought up as something we needed to NCE. Next slide. So all of our details right now live in the BMP handbook. It's an online resource that people can access electronically. We have materials in PDF and AutoCAD format so that project proponents can easily pull and drop these details into their plan set. And this is where we are looking to add any materials that are presented or prepared as part of this effort. Next slide. Okay, so in summary, we went over the area-wide stormwater implementation process. We talked about the pollutant load reduction model and how we're using that, how we then do conceptual treatment planning. We've been doing that in Mountain to Marina and Tahoe Keys most recently. And for Mountain to Marina, we're looking at moving forward into implementation planning, advancing that to those more permit level plans and finding funding to do that. And we talked about the TRPA approval and documentation process that kind of is ongoing as things are prepared and, you know, vary depending on the project and the situation. In presenting all of this to the working group, we got a lot of feedback and resources. So this has to do with our Stormwater Complete Street Detailed Drawings project. We're in the process of going through those resources and feedback to really understand what we have in what format so that we can then direct our consultant very clearly so we can use our resources, our limited resources most effectively. And once they draft things, we'll go through with the working group to review and finalize and update the BMP handbook. So that's where we're at with that project. Okay, next slide. All right, so that takes us to where we can turn it over to you and ask for any questions and have some discussion. Again, no formal action is required or being requested, but we want to welcome any feedback or suggestions that you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay. Appreciate that. Thank you, John, for bringing this to us. I will come back to APC with any questions or comments they have for Shay or John. Eric.
Thank you. That was fun as usual. I'm not sure what the Washoe County Stormwater staff, I apologize for not knowing, I should know, have represented about our situation. My understanding is that we'd be very happy to just have all of Washoe County under a stormwater system. And in fact, we believe it's probably going to be necessary for us to meet our commitments to Lahontan at some point. It's going to be necessary. And if we had the money, we'd do it right away. I think the thing that is really, I mean, once you realize you need to do it, and once you realize it's a good idea and that you should probably move towards it, then often the last question is money. Money for maintenance, as you demonstrated, there's lots of different ideas to have money for maintenance and an ongoing revenue source to help that go. But to get something built to begin with is really a monumental capital project. Especially if we're talking about all of Washoe County, not just a stormwater for a new development, but for all of Washoe County. So I think over time, we're going to be looking for those funding sources for that capital project that is going to at some point be necessary. But I'm really curious if TRPA has a long-term goal for a basin accomplishing, a basin-wide stormwater management coverage, or get as much of the area covered under an actual stormwater management system instead of just BMPs. And if that doesn't exist, why couldn't we have that long-term goal? Even if it's 50 years from now, why couldn't the basin as a whole have a long-term goal of covering the most amount of the basin possible with stormwater management system? Because I think over time, the BMP system isn't going to work in the really long term. I think we're going to need more stormwater systems. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Because it is a really interesting long-term issue. It's not a 5-10 year issue. This is, capital improvements for 50 years. And in that sense, you can have goals that might take that long to get you there. And so I'm just curious what the TRPA thoughts are about the capital expense necessary to do these on a large scale, and if there's any appetite for thinking about a goal to cover as much of the basin as possible. Thank you.
I can respond to that. I think our long-term goal is the TMDL and supporting the local governments with the flexibility to meet that in the best way for their jurisdiction and the conditions that they have in their jurisdiction. And from a funding standpoint, having the funding mechanism allowance in our code provides an opportunity where there can be revenue collected from properties in lieu of them infiltrating on site. And John, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, excuse me, John Hester, I'll just add to that. You have an MOU with the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, just like South Lake Tahoe and El Dorado and Placer have with Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board. And you have to make certain progress every year or every 2 years as part of your TMDL permit on the California side, MOU on the. We're kind of coming alongside that because you're going to have to do that whether TRPA was here or not. And trying to help facilitate that happening to meet our water quality thresholds. So how you do it is really going to be probably like some of the items we discussed on housing, up to you to do individually, and what area of your county you include in a system and what area you don't. Depend on the load from that each of the catchments. Douglas County is doing a countywide stormwater utility, and their board voted to do that. And I think they're looking at probably different districts. Shay may know better than I, but there's a district that's going to be in the Tahoe Basin that will cover the urban development in Tahoe, and they're also using it for flood control. That may be a totally different approach than what Washoe wants to do, or Placer, or City of South Lake Tahoe. So it's really going to be up to you all to decide how you meet those TMDL requirements. We're trying to help facilitate that. Like I said, in terms of timeline, I think the TMDL is like a 60-year, or maybe it's 50 now, 65. And this is just kind of a story. The Porter Cologne Act, which I talked about earlier, we just this last year, you may or may not know, some people who had septics just said, well, we're going to run everything downhill to a pipe that runs in the beach. And some of those have started failing now that they're 50 years old. So we've just now said, you can't keep doing that. As that fails, you're going to have to go to a system that has lift stations and not gravity into the lake area proper. And so you may take 50 years to do it at Washoe County. I don't know. But it's going to be a generational thing probably to retrofit what areas need to be retrofitted. And again, like I said, probably well over 90% won't be. That's a very conceptual general answer, Eric, but that's yeah. Well, that's what I think is going to have to happen, but I would invite Jennifer from NDEP to, and I guess Ben's on from Lahontan as well.
Thanks. Thanks for passing me the ball. Jennifer Carr for the record. I'll make a note on the capital infrastructure funding piece. We on the Clean Water Act state revolving fund that we get capitalized by US EPA had been restricted. We had to make a legislative change to this rule as to who was eligible. It used to just be restricted to an entity that had jurisdiction over sewage. We changed the law session before last, and now we're just about done changing the regulations where an eligible entity can do things like stormwater. It's not just about building wastewater treatment plants anymore. So that infrastructure funding is becoming available. It would be today, except we got stuck in legislative review over some prevailing wage elements. So we're back fixing that. But I anticipate that the regulations that support that infrastructure financing will be done by the end of our fiscal year, which is June 30. Of course, that doesn't pay for maintenance and those sorts of things, but it certainly can fund infrastructure. The other struggle that comes with financing infrastructure is that if it is a loan, the entity receiving the loan from us has to be a viable borrower, and we have to know how they're going to pay that loan back. So things like stormwater utilities and those sorts of things that have a revenue source to repay a loan, if it's not granted out as grant funds, and then that helps. It helps the entity have a way to pay that loan back. So that's the infrastructure side. I thank you, Shay, for the presentation. I like and I like the idea of more regional solutions, because even just this last year, there was a story that came through my office about human behavior on parcel BMPs circumventing the system, where a person had something on their land, and I presume it made a marshy spot, or it was a detention basin, and maybe it had water in it, but whatever the reason, they cut a little ditch through it so it would drain better, and it went in a different place that water wasn't supposed to go. So the more we can sort of circumvent the adverse effects of human behavior and lack of institutional knowledge. Why is this thing here? I don't like it. I bought this house. I want something different. Those sorts of things that you can handle on a more regional scale, I think are beneficial, because then it's like I said, more institutionalized instead of relying on people to do the right thing, which people often do, but then some don't. So and where this is intersected with other development discussions that we've had about, you know, the possibility of being able to have, you know, more coverage or I'll say parking, where maybe the developed area or parcel is part of a larger plan so that they can, that stormwater coming off that property can be caught, you know, further down literally down the road before it gets to the lake. And so I think these do help to intersect with other policies that people are struggling with up here, and look for more regional solutions. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I didn't see Ben's hand shoot up.
Well, I'll raise my real hand. Since my name came up. Yeah, thanks, Shay. John, good presentation. Just a couple comments, I guess. First, you know, Lawton would totally support, you know, I'm, by the way, Ben Letton, Executive Officer for Lawton Water Board. We totally support this type of initiative to create more regional, area-wide, you know, treatment systems. One thing to think about, though, is that, you know, we typically, most of the urban implementers that are, you know, part of the TMDL are achieving all of their clarity credits on an annual basis. However, we're not seeing the corresponding change in lake clarity yeah, in Tahoe, you know, for a variety of reasons. And there's a lot of work being done by the science community to look into that. And one of those things is realizing that perhaps the size of the sediment particles that we're focused on are really smaller than we thought. And what I mean by that is right now the TMDL is focused on 16 microns and less, which is really small. But some data and studies show that it might, the focal sediment particle size is even less than that, like 8 or less. And so why I bring that up is that when you're looking at these treatment systems and specifically the design for those, we have to ask ourselves about, you know, efficacy of those treatment systems and whether or not they're systems that are designed specifically for Tahoe with that very small fine sediment particle in mind. And so may I'll stop there for a second and just get any response from Shay or John about that. You know, it's very specialized here in Tahoe, as with a lot of things. And so we need to really be thinking about targeting that super small fine sediment particle size in terms of our BMPs and these types of you know, infrastructure.
I can respond to that. I think that the TMDL has shown that infiltration of runoff through soil is the best way to remove these fine particles. And we talked about wanting to have really Tahoe appropriate designs when we're looking at area wide so that it's helping to meet us. And we've had discussions at the Stormwater Quality Improvement Committee where local jurisdictions are seeing, you know, some challenges with respect to maintenance and ensuring that infiltration basins still continue to infiltrate, and the importance of having a treatment train approach, being able to pull out coarse material and vector that out and get it out of the system before it reaches an infiltration basin. So it really facilitates maintenance and prolongs the lifespan of that infiltration system. And again, also looking at the opportunities in the right-of-way, because a lot of the right-of-way in many of these places are unimproved and provide space where additional treatment can be implemented.
And I'll just add to that, Ben, this is John Hester. I'm not at all qualified to talk in the detail like Shay, but it's like I'm reminded of what we went through on air quality. Is it PM10? Is it PM 2.5? Is it, you know, it changes. And if the particle size changes for the TMDL, we'll have to deal with that when we do. That's why adaptive management is such a good thing. Building in flexibility to the facilities or different capabilities into the facilities like Shay talked about hopefully some of that will come up through this detailed drawing project, but if not, that'll be probably the next edition or the next round after that. But you know, it's as the science gets better and as we know more and have more experience, we have to change. And so that's more of a conceptual answer, but hope that addresses it.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Yeah, that's the extent of my comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Crystal, how about we go to you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Shay, for the great presentation, and thanks, John. I know we've had a lot of conversations with your team on this topic, so I really appreciate the presentation. Just a couple things, I guess, for Placer. I just wanted to first confirm that we've got Placer staff on that working group, is one question. And then the second is, I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit more to the funding mechanism piece that you touched on, Shay. And I know that there's some challenges on the California side, and maybe if you could just speak to that a little bit more. Thanks.
Sure, no problem. We are working with Andy Dykin at Placer County, and we've met with other public works staff as part of our working group and just process and discussing area-wide treatment with housing initiatives in Placer County. And for the funding mechanism in Chapter 13 of TRPA's code, which is our area plan chapter, it does allow, this was created and evaluated through environmental review and approved as part of the 2012 regional plan update. So that allows local governments to collect a fee from properties within a treatment area in lieu of those properties infiltrating runoff on site and meeting TRPA's BMP requirements at the parcel level. As I said, there's Proposition 218 in California, which kind of restricts how local governments can collect revenue for stormwater. You can do so for wastewater and water, but for stormwater, you need a vote to do so. But since this is a TRPA requirement, this in lieu fee provides a workaround for those areas to collect fees for properties to meet our BMP requirements by paying a fee. And there are a variety of ways that has been implemented already in the basin. In some cases, no fee has been requested. For example, Cave Rock on the Nevada side, we have a lot of general improvement districts. They're already collecting fees from property owners. So when the basin was implemented at the base of that neighborhood, they didn't charge any additional fee. They were relying on their existing revenue and already had an existing mechanism to collect funding for that, to do that maintenance, but it's the GID that maintains that project. On the California side in the city, we have a community facilities district for the Bijou area-wide treatment system that basically collects runoff down at the CVS barn-shaped building in Bijou and pumps it up in the watershed to infiltrate in basins. That's an expensive way. It has costs to administer, and it's difficult to add and remove properties. For Harrison Avenue, that was an assessment that funded both installation and maintenance. So there's different ways to do it. And then some smaller systems that we have, there's individual connection agreements. So State Line Stormwater is an example on the California side where properties paid a single fee and entered into a connection agreement with the city to have their runoff go to their system, and they are in compliance for a certain number of years. So depending on what makes sense for the local jurisdiction, there could be already a community facilities district in place, or, like the GID. So it really, we provide for a variety of ways that you can do it. We want to have flexibility so that depending on what the situation is, the local government can implement what makes sense for their situation. Does that help answer your question, Crystal?
That does. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Crystal. How about Ashley Cyber and then Robert? And then
Yeah,
Ellery.
thank you. In thinking through the stormwater discussion here, it just reminded me of some anecdotes recently that we've had related to stormwater stuff. So we sometimes get called by community members with flooding that is happening adjacent to their houses. And so we'll go and check it out. We've looked at a few incidents recently. And with the exception of sometimes when there's beaver activity in certain areas, generally it's not from Forest Service land. And a lot of times it's happening during the times when there's still snow on the ground that's actually blocking or, you know, the actual stormwater systems that are meant to go there, or blocking the, you know, runoff from getting to where it's supposed to be going, and then it sits. And so I am curious if the group has thought through that piece at all, if there's anything in there related to, you know, what happens during these rain on snow events when things are clogged, or requirements for folks to, you know, when they are piling their snow, are, you know, is that included in the plan when they come to you and say, okay, you know, this is the stormwater plan, but then also this is where we're piling our snow, to show that it, you know, it's not going to be affecting that, or during those times when we have these events where there's still snow on the ground, that at least some parts of the system is functioning. So I'm just curious if that's in there, and if not, if there are any plans to think through anything like that.
Thank you, Ashley. I can speak to that. We address rain on snow in a variety of different ways. The first being our design storm, which is the 20-year 1-hour storm, or 1 inch of water from all impervious surfaces that has to be infiltrated. That's a requirement for all developed properties. And like I said, there's different ways you can do that, especially if you're site constrained and can't actually infiltrate. But that is much larger of a design storm for Tahoe than most of the rest of North America. Most other places are really looking at like the 2-year storm, because most pollutants are in the first flush. And once you get beyond that, it's just clean water that's going through. But in Tahoe, we have a larger size so that we can accommodate rain on snow events. In our BMP handbook for sizing basins, if that basin is going to be used for snow storage, we have a way in which that basin needs to be sized larger by a certain percentage. So that guidance is actually in the BMP handbook right now. You know, there's projects that are going to in place. We just highlighted one in our newsletter for Myers that installed a number of community basins to address both stormwater and flooding, just because of the location of that whole neighborhood being next to the Upper Truckee River and in the floodplain. Those situations are going to be a lot more common there. And ultimately, if, you know, there is rain on snow and things are blocked, the streets are, you know, provide a certain conveyance system to get water to the lake as well. Snow storage is something that's, you know, a piece of every BMP retrofit or BMP plan of any permitted project. You need to identify where it is on the site, and the amount of snow storage you provide has to be a certain percentage of how much impervious surface that you have. So we do have places in our BMP handbook that we address that to, you know, a pretty good extent right now, I think.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thanks, Ashley. Robert?
Robert Ehrlich. Thanks, Shay, for including all the information on the right-of-way edges with the permeable pavement and the need to stabilize some of those and to have systems like you're talking about with permeable pavement, maybe with perforated pipe underneath it. Because I think those are some of the major source areas. I think the infiltration, again, is really key in keeping incentives to infiltrate higher up on parcels wherever you can is really important because, again, hearing more about Ben's concern about maybe even smaller particles, the way to not get smaller particles delivered to the lake is to have them infiltrate. And these area-wide systems are very important. But if you're looking at advanced treatment at the end of a pipe and you're bringing water in from far away, then I think it's best to find incentives to keep infiltrating where you can. Like, for example, El Dorado County, the residential areas are typically larger, more of the properties can infiltrate on than like something like Kings Beach or certain parts of Tahoe. Wondering if there's a way to incentivize going larger than kind of minimal sizing requirements for these area-wide BMPs. And I know that might be linked to coverage incentives and stuff, but yeah, I can conceive of designing an area-wide BMP. And then I'm just wondering if you design it larger than that, do you get additional TMDL credits, and are any jurisdictions actually doing that?
Thanks, Robert. I can speak to that. What I like about area-wide treatment is that it does take a watershed scale approach. So it can really look at where are the best opportunities to give you the greatest amount of pollutant reduction. And so, for example, with Mountain Tarina, we really were looking at installing basins and other infiltration higher up in the watershed, even though there's already a lot of infrastructure and basins that are down lower in the watershed, not just to improve treatment, but also to help with any flooding, especially with the rise of climate change and expecting more extreme fluctuation of weather events. The incentives are really related to pollutant load reduction and credit potential. I don't know if going larger necessarily means better. I mean, our 20-year 1-hour design storm was evaluated and looked at during the 2012 regional plan. And there is a point of diminishing returns where even if you go larger, you're not necessarily getting any more treatment. And so, especially we have limited space, we kept it at the 20-year 1-hour storm. It's already significantly bigger than most other places in North America, but it's what makes sense for Tahoe given our situation. And whatever gets proposed, it would be at the watershed scale. It would be what gives the most load reduction for the most economical situation. So, doing that pollutant load reduction modeling really gives you that flexibility to look at types of treatments in different locations and what gives you the greatest load reduction to get you there.
Okay, wondering again on the 20-year 1-hour, I mean, we do have, these larger storm events are pretty common, and often the antecedent conditions could be that the basins are pretty occupied by either snow or rain prior to an additional pulse from an atmospheric river or something like that. So I'm just wondering if, the TMDL folks, pollutant load reduction kind of considers that, these large storms, you may still get quite a bit of benefit from having excess capacity on that, particularly because a lot of the road systems may be delivering stuff further down into the basins into the watershed in those conditions.
Yeah, thank you. I know that we looked at the sizing with respect to climate change and thinking about that more precipitation would likely fall in the form of rain versus snow, we felt that the 20-year size was okay. But as things move forward, it's really going to be modeled based on the TMDL and what load reduction that you get. But it's not just infiltration in terms of treatment, it's also source control. So if you can stabilize the road shoulder or do different things to prevent sediment from being mobilized in the first place, even if you do have a bigger storm, that should help. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Ellery? In the queue.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think my comments are really just going to harken back to some comments that Jennifer made and also Eric. Just to kind of add on, it's really cool to hear about the infrastructure funding and the change to the legislation. As we all know, state lands receives EIP bond funds to help support water quality projects. So I think the complement of the two funding sources could really help to achieve, Eric, maybe what you're envisioning in terms of these larger area-wide projects that you may have in mind. But in addition to that, our funding source is really just limited to capital. We're not able to apply those funds for ongoing maintenance. So Shay, to your BMP handbook and the initiative of your working group, I was wondering if maybe you could also consider ease of maintenance with your list of BMPs, or maybe provide some guidance in terms of frequency of maintenance. I think having kind of that maintenance element to it could really help weigh the pros and cons of how much do we want to spend now on maybe like a system that could have longevity to it versus maybe a system that would require more frequent and ongoing maintenance. And if we had a little bit more of that information in the handbook, it could really help with that analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Ellery. Maintenance requirements and specifications are already a section for each BMP in the handbook. So we have verbiage for each BMP and a table that really goes over those things that you just brought up. So I appreciate that. And, you know, that is something that we'll talk about. I think facilitating maintenance is a good objective for anything that we add. And it's always good to see you. I think back to when the TMDL was first adopted, Ellery was like, Shay and I will be there with our walkers 60 years from now. And it's, yeah, with our canes. Enjoying that it was met. So yes. At age like 98.
It's a great visual. Anyone else want to weigh in? Eric? And then Hitch?
I appreciate Ellery's point because you know, you can picture maintenance staff, right? When you say maintenance, you're talking about human beings driving their pickup out there and parking and getting out and doing something. And you can either picture them cursing the engineers for how it was done and for how many hours it's going to take or days, or you can picture them going out there and getting it done and leaving to go into the next one. And whether or not that happens is based on how much thought the engineers put into it in the very beginning. And so having those, some nod to that in the handbook saying, hey, think about the cost of maintenance in your engineering design that's a valuable thing to have. Thank you.
Good point. Hitch?
Eric and John, Shay, thanks for the presentation. As it relates to chapter 13, which you know, certain type of projects can get additional coverage if local jurisdictions implement area-wide treatment. And obviously, I've said this many times, obviously local jurisdictions are concerned is with the cost of implementing these regional systems. And I believe, and maybe Mr. Ehrlich can expound on this, that, you know, the cities, our system is primarily designed to treat runoff in the city right away and not private properties, because my understanding is that even if that we don't need to rely on the private properties to meet our TMDL credits, I believe. So my question is, tying the BMP requirements at a regional scale to get additional coverage at the private scale. Is the premise of that is because, as Mrs. Carr alluded to, that because of human nature, eventually those are not going to be maintained and will eventually have a spillover effect into the public right of way in order to treat that spillover in order to get the additional coverage?
I think there's that, as well as just the resources and time needed to follow up with individual property owners to make sure they're actually doing their maintenance, and how effective that is versus using those same time and resources to have public works go out there. And just to speak to your comment, Eric, I appreciate that. And I think why we are meeting with our local government working group is to get that feedback, thinking about plow friendly designs, can we make it around the corner without missing a whole area, or making sure that the curb and gutter is totally flush so that when I go by with the sweeper, I'm not missing a whole section? Or is this able to be vacked out really easily from a maintenance standpoint, so I don't have to get out of my truck in such a way to do that? And looking at situations where roles and responsibilities for maintenance, when facilities may be installed on Forest Service land or CTC land or private land, and with respect to the Tahoe Keys, there could be improvements installed on TKPOA land. So what maintenance responsibilities fall on TKPOA staff versus city staff, and really looking at playing to each organization's strengths. But John, I think, we're providing the flexibility. I think it is expensive, but when you can provide for multiple benefits, then you have other funding sources that you can look to for active transportation or wildlife, habitat restoration, things like that, where you can actually accomplish more than one thing than just stormwater alone. So, we're always looking at multiple benefit type projects where we can have overlapping benefits with the same facilities or infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add into this conversation before we start another one potentially. One thing to keep in mind is that as the TMDL continues to progress through the next 50 years that are still left, those credits and credit requirements increase. And so the system is by nature ratcheting tighter and tighter as time goes on. A lot of the low hanging fruit has already been constructed, and credits may be harder to obtain. So the reliability of a credit to be able to prove up its effectiveness, I think, will also be more important as time goes on. Yeah. So maybe it may be easier to prove up a credit that is done by a municipality instead of trying to rely on people in their individual homes. And very well could end up being a combination of a number of things that get each jurisdiction to its end game at the end of the day. But while Ben is right, everybody, and has been stated, everybody's meeting their credits at this point in time, but those credits are going to get harder each time we ratchet them up.
I would also speak to that in that sometimes you might have treatment in place, and even if all of the private properties installed their BMPs, you don't actually get any additional treatment because there's so much treatment in that area. It's not actually reducing the pollutant load, like it's that point of diminishing return. So rather than still have all those properties spend money installing BMPs that actually aren't getting us more pollutant load reduction, that money could then be funneled to the jurisdiction for operation and maintenance by using that in lieu fee. Properties will still have to do source control BMPs. For area wide, we're really talking about infiltration BMPs as being, that's what would be addressed by the area wide versus at the parcel by parcel layoff
level?
I might be many years into my retirement already, so I don't have the cane, but so I'm a little rusty on some of this stuff. But my understanding would be like the city would maybe be designing for sizes dealing with what their right of way would be, but their stormwater permit, however, requires them to be responsible for all the stormwater that gets into their system. So if there's stuff from private properties coming into it, I think the water board or TMDL would be looking at what's coming out of the system, and city has some responsibility for those.
Yeah, I think that's right. We have the MS4 requirement, which isn't necessarily a TMDL thing. That's really a Clean Water Act standard, Port of Cologne standard. So yes, anything that touches our right of way that we bought and need to deal with. Yeah. Other thoughts? Good. I'll just say, you know, we're very supportive. We spend a lot of time, you know, thinking about this and have for the last, been a long time, 25 years. I'll give a shout out to Russ, one of our employees who really has innovated in this space and done a lot of things, looking at road sand, abrasives, pavement condition, sweeping, priority watersheds, disconnected watersheds. It is very true. We don't really need to do BMPs everywhere in all places. Some places still flow out into the woods and really never go anywhere, which is kind of a romantic thought to think that that still occurs. But it does, because staff goes out in big rainstorms and walks those channels and watches the water disappear. So that's a nice thing. You can take advantage of that. So yeah, I think we think about what you said all the time, Jennifer, is that the easy stuff has happened. The credit's been in the bank for EIP projects for 25 years. We've taken advantage of those credits. We're maintaining things, but it's going to continue to get much harder with every 5-year permit term. And so we will inevitably down the road need to look to private property in order to make our TMDL credits work. It's just, that will probably be different for every jurisdiction. It's exciting stuff. Okay, let's go. If we're good, did you want to say one last thing?
I know there's at least one guy from an organization called Keep Tahoe Blue who might want to make a comment. So I don't know, you're not making a decision, but you probably want to invite the public comment.
Absolutely. Let's do public comment. So this is item 4B. We'll go to members in the room first, then we'll go online. So folks in the room, come on up to the podium, turn the microphone on, state your name for the record. For members joining us via Zoom on our webinar, you can now click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or dial *9 on your phone. You'll be unmuted, called upon and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. So we'll go first to Gavin.
All right. Thank you for the invitation. This is Gavin Feiger, Policy Director at Keep Tahoe Blue. And I do say I have to leave, so I hate to comment and run in case I spark something genius to talk about. But this is a really savvy group and really just want to highlight, you know, the importance of whatever mix. Great presentation, Shay. That's fantastic. And whatever mix you start going forward with, and really housing is, you know, not even the elephant in the room. It's on your agenda today. You know, that's the first place that this will probably come up and be expressed. Is this compliance is key. So, you know, chapter 13, awesome. Area-wide infiltration seems like a really good idea. Area-wide systems, obviously expensive, but work really well. Parcel level, we know works in some cases. So, you know, whatever makes go forward with, just compliance is key. Compliance being monitoring and maintenance. And you guys talked a lot about that. So again, super savvy groups. I think I'll just leave it at that, you know, making sure that whatever is in place can be and will be monitored and maintained. And that can look all different ways. I mean, we send volunteers out to the Osgood basins to pull willows and clean out trash. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do maintenance, and a lot of different ways to approach it, but it will take money. So, yeah. And then the one other thought that came up, this actually is really more from Andrew Ryan, North Shore, but we were walking around Kings Beach and talked about doing improvements in the right of way. You you know, all the streets in the grid are pretty narrow and don't have curb and gutter sidewalks. There's sediment that sometimes drains from a property onto the street, sometimes from the street onto a property and infiltrates. But his point, and I think is an interesting one, is that, you know, the county calls for, when those streets are updated, to widen them by, you know, 5, 7, 8 feet to put in curb and gutter and in some cases sidewalks. And, you know, two questions came to mind. And one is, the curb and gutter is great, but like, where is it funneling that sediment off to? You know, in some cases, some of it is already infiltrating on some properties. So it's just hard to think of, like, focusing on the right of way is a great idea, but it's hard to think of a blanket policy to like start addressing that. And then my other real question is, like, where is that coverage accounted for? Where is this extra like 5 feet on miles and miles and miles of roadways like accounted for, when we're being so careful about accounting for coverage everywhere? So maybe it's somewhere. That's truly like not a leading question. I just like, I really don't know. So a couple of things to think about in this context, and then just, yeah, making sure that whatever we get in place is will be maintained and monitored. Thanks.
Thanks, Gavin. Rob.
Hello. I know in the last public comment, I'm Rob Olson. I know in the last public comment, there was concern about how I got here, and I got here in an electric car. And that's just the thing. I think we should have options. People should have options on how to address our impact on this earth. And area-wide, you know, treatment, local treatment, you know, like, I think that's all good. And but I do want to make sure that we're not saddling workforce housing with limitations because of trying to get to that. So what do we do in the meantime, where we're trying to do this area-wide options, and every area has to work through that and find the funds for it? So I think we need to be nimble and have options for people. And I think workforce housing, there's a lot of great stuff with the phase 2 amendments. I think some of it kind of prohibits it because of the stormwater system language. So I would kind of echo what Andrew was saying in the last comment of, like, it's not going to hurt to just try some projects. Let's get some housing projects that don't have to connect to an area-wide treatment system. And when you're going from like 30% that might be allowed coverage to 70%, I get the 70% might need to deal with it offsite. But if you're going to just 50% coverage, maybe you can deal with that on site. So let's be a little bit more sophisticated. I think there's a lot of options. I think that the group that you have, I would see if it's welcome to have private engineers and people come onto that group too, because I think there's other challenges that they have to work with, and they look at things in different ways. And probably last, I would say that I'm in the Tahoe City area. I don't know if this is the term, but I like the idea of these bio bulbs, like the bio bulb outs that you were talking about. Tahoe City probably has about 7 locations where I think that bulb outs would be great. It would calm the traffic. And if that could help with, you know, treatment of things, you know, the water, that would be great too. So I'm with the Tahoe City Downtown Association as well. So I'd welcome dialogue if we could be a case study on that, because we're like trying to do traffic calming, and Caltrans just wants wider roads, people going quicker. They actually increase the speeds around Tahoe City, and we're like trying to make things more pedestrian friendly. So we're polar opposite with Caltrans, and maybe TRPA could be the middle ground to help navigate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Hello again.
Hello again, since I'm here. Sophia Heydrich, Mountain Area Preservation. I wasn't going to comment, but I heard some of the other commenters, and I did want to echo what Gavin said about compliance just being really critical and important. Nothing new here, nothing you don't know. Kind of a question, just how is compliance currently monitored, and how is TRPA working to improve compliance? I'm sure that you are working on that. And then also in terms of the plans for area-wide stormwater treatment, you mentioned, Ms. Navarro, that that if it shows that sort of parcel level BMPs are doing a better job than an area-wide stormwater treatment system would, then that would sort of stay in place. I think that's how it was framed to me. Have you ever seen a plan proposed where you came and said, actually, what's happening right now on the ground is just better? And we're just going to not do an area-wide stormwater treatment system because the existing infiltration and BMPs are going to do a better job in this particular location. Just curious. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sophia. I can respond to that. So with respect to compliance, TRPA actually tracks the status of every developed property in the basin through a database, and it's available through our parcel tracker online. So whether you have parcel BMPs, whether you're participating in an area-wide, when you installed BMPs, when your BMPs were most recently maintained. And so that's how we track each parcel by parcel. As far as if you're doing more of an area-wide system, then you would have to demonstrate that system's performance through the TMDL. The local jurisdictions work to provide that information to the 2 states that administer the TMDL. They will be doing things like BMP RAM, rapid assessment methodology determining if things are still infiltrating, and that affects how much credit they get. So we do, I think, have pretty robust systems to track that right now. And what was your last question? I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Not so far, but if there's an area where maybe it's been the other way, like what I brought up to John, where certain neighborhoods, so in El Dorado County, for example, the Golden Bear neighborhood is disconnected. It's far away from the lake. And they don't actually get much more credit from properties doing their BMPs or not. Not that catchment is registered, but the local jurisdictions are prioritizing which catchments to register based on where they can get credit. But I definitely think that, in more rural settings where things are more dispersed and water can sheet flow off to an area, make more sense than in more urban areas where there's, more demands on the space for use. You have more off pavement parking and people walking everywhere and have greater needs than in more of a rural setting. But yeah, if something showed that, that's why the PLRM is so important, because it can show what is the best strategy to get you the best amount of credits.
Thanks, Shay.
I wanted to try to get to the comment before that. Could you go back to the slide with the process?
Do you want to finish public comment, or you want?
Yeah, we could do that. There's
Okay, let's finish public comment. So how about anyone else in the room? I don't think I see anyone. Catherine, let's try online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 2 hands raised online. The first hand up is Alan Miller. Alan, please unmute to make your comments.
Hi, Alan Miller, civil and environmental engineer, expertise in water quality and stormwater management. Hi all, especially the new member. And my question for Shannon would be whether you know who I am, if you'd ever read any of my comments for the record. I'm here to speak in support of area-wide treatment systems. I didn't comment specifically on this agenda item in writing for the public record. That's because I've commented extensively to the APC and governing board in the last 8 months concerning water quality, most particularly to APC and to the EIP committee and governing board in January 2026. I said in those comments that water quality restoration hasn't occurred for 55 years based on the use of BMPs and infiltration. That hasn't worked and takes a lot of land as well. So transferring BMPs from individual parcels to area-wide won't make much difference, when what's really needed is a more advanced, higher level of treatment for urban runoff and really to drinking water standards with effluent limits applicable. So the balance of my time will have to be about silos and how TRPA goes about making sure that TRPA does not conduct interdisciplinary environmental reviews while ignoring public comment, with the exception today of Mr. Letton and his comments pertaining to water quality and the TMDL, and I thank you for that. It is apparent that the management's perceived job is to make sure everyone operates in a silo, isolated from each other, isolated from the public, isolated from reality. Continued promotion of the status quo, ignoring public comments, and like Mr. Hester, which is that the TMDL is working. It's a regulation put together 4 point sources of municipal stormwater. And it hasn't had any noticeable effect here at Lake Tahoe. So that whole thing needs to be re-examined, as well as the water quality treatment approaches applied. I understand infiltration is viable and low cost, but it's not moving the needle for water quality to any great degree. So again, I'd refer to things like my water quality report from August 25 in the record before the governing board, and comments to the EIP committee and the governing board in January 28th, my testimony to APC on January 14th, and concerning code amendments back in November as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Miller.
And the last hand raised is Andrew Ryan. Andrew, please unmute to make your comment.
Hey, everybody. Andrew Ryan from up here in Kings Beach. You know, in general, I think the presence and the talking about area-wide treatment systems is just fine. You know, I would ask that staff and the APC also consider, like, how do we get from A to B? You know, if we talk about the premise of having area-wide treatment installed, it needs to be talked about to ever happen, but there's also the reality of where we're at, and some way to manage the short term, to also have other things our community needs in the meantime. You know, from the compliance standpoint, I certainly understand that TRPA being able to go direct to a county or a city to say, hey, you're out of compliance is much easier than individuals, but I don't necessarily think that the outcome of that shift is all that beneficial for residents in all instances. So there needs to be more balance there. You know, it could be very hard to get a reluctant entity to work with you if it's not in their own codes to provide monitoring or compliance or other. And that doesn't negate the need for compliance. I've lived in Kings Beach since '97, and the same trench drain at one of our banks has been clogged the entire time I've lived here. It hasn't worked for over, you know, what is that, 20 some odd years. So the compliance is real. You know, as far as the plurm and referencing a model as an end all be all, it's a good tool. You know, if TRPA wants to have that tool, I think they should be able to manage it in-house and not have to go out to consultancy, so that you can actually use the model effectively and discreetly in smaller cases, and not have to contract or find funding, then go contract with a third party who then holds the key to that model for it to be usable and effective across the region. And then at small looks, you guys have to own the model and be able to operate it. The complete streets part, I think, is a great place to look. And I thank Gavin for bringing up my comment about the Tahoe Basin Area Plan, which shows on average, you know, 4 to 8 foot widening of all the streets in Kings Beach when they get rebuilt, you know, with no accounting for that coverage. And so I'd really like to see a coverage accounting as the near step to where a project can say, hey, what if I improve the amount of coverage in the right of way and provide treatment? Is that not an effective and plus versus having to participate or design an area-wide treatment system? So hopefully we can have some solutions from area-wide treatment from where we are now. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
There are no more hands raised to comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll close public comment. And Mr. Hester,
Yes, if I could ask to go back to the slide that shows the process. I want to try to respond to a couple of the comments. No, it's the one with the arrows. There we go. If you look under implementation plan, and I think you'll recognize if use of interim treatments is proposed, provide some detail on monitoring and maintenance. We have, as a couple of the commenters know, been in conversations with Placer County and Stephanie Holloway about their desire to do an interim treatment, to get from here to there. And what Shay and I have said is if you want to use something like BMPs, and the county wants to take responsibility for using them as an interim step till you get to an area-wide, because that would allow the property to develop and then maybe pay into that, future system. We're open to that. So we heard you and we're willing to discuss that with Placer County to be specific. In terms of silos, I think obviously you heard about when you saw the code slide that part of this is housing talking to water quality, talking to complete streets, which is transportation, and all of those reaching across different subject areas gives us the opportunity to do much better or be much more effective at funding sources, which as the vice chair mentioned, if you can get transportation money for complete streets and combine that with water quality money and make some more housing available, that's the kind of working across functional lines and non-silo things that we're trying to do. So I'm not sure if I'm addressing what his concern was, but we are trying to do multi-objective projects here and in the EIP and everywhere we do them. So those are my two comments to the comments. Hope that helps.
thanks, John. I think that's good. My response to Mr. Olson's comment, I agree. I think the area-wide treatment requirement as part of the phase 2 housing amendments has been problematic to get those implemented. And I know Cultivating Communities is looking at that in the EIS. And I'm looking forward to those results. So I agree with you. Any final thoughts before we let Shay go have lunch? I think we're good.
Just that I know who Alan Miller is.
Alan, she knows who you are. Thanks, Shay. Appreciate it. Have a good
Thank
afternoon.
you. Appreciate it.
Okay, that concludes our items. Let's move along here so we can all go have lunch.
Yeah,
Item 5, we'll go to Mr. Hester, Executive Director Report.
Make the executive director report very short. The governing board approved the thresholds that you recommended. Coming up, we have one item with a specific date, and that's artificial tree cell towers standards, or monopines or monopoles, whatever. That will be coming up in May. And then the last item that I have, I was given directions on this, is the Best in Basin Awards. We're requesting nominations. They're now open for the 2026 Best in Basin Awards. If you want to nominate projects, we'd appreciate that, or serve as a judge, we'd appreciate that. It highlights projects or programs around the lake that have been exceptional planning, exceptional implementation, or environmental stewardship. So if you're interested, let Tracy know. And with that, I'll turn it over to the General Counsel.
Thanks, John. Hi, Graham.
Yeah, hi. Just to get quick updates just to let you know that since the last time we met, we received a lawsuit from Doug Flaherty suing TRPA for its approval of the Washoe Tahoe area plan amendments that came through APC last fall and were approved by, I can't remember the exact month from APC, but were approved by the governing board in December. And so we're dealing with that litigation. And if you get email from Catherine just asking for to check if you see if you have any records related to that, but we're preparing our response. And if there's any questions along the way, you know, you can direct it my way.
Thanks, Graham. We don't need to send, when Doug Flaherty sends a public comment to APC and it's in the record already, we're not sending that to Catherine.
Please don't.
Okay. I don't want to do that.
I have it.
Yeah, figured. Thank you. Okay, great. Let's come to APC members. I'm going to come around the table. We'll start down here with Mr. Young. Thank you. Mr. Ehrlich. Thanks. Mr. Alling.
Nothing at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Garth. Ms. Carr? Ms. Stoller?
Nothing from me.
Mr. Drew? Everyone's feeling tired. Hitch? Oh, your mic's not on.
The city council passed a motion. First reading, new ordinance. We dropped the buffer requirement. Caps VHRs at 900 in residential zones and allow attached condos to apply.
Someone likes VHRs. Okay. Ashley Cyber, how about you?
I'll keep it quick today and just let everyone know that we do have a new we have an acting forest supervisor, Dion Uzez. Some folks may remember her. She had been an acting on our unit some years back. And so she'll be here, and we're not exactly sure though for how long. The hiring piece is still a little difficult. So how long until we get a permanent forest supervisor, we're not totally sure, and not totally sure if Dion would be staying that whole time, but we anticipate she'll at least be here for a couple of months. So, and we also plan to have the Caldor Restoration EA decision sometime at the end of March or possibly the first weekish of April. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. How about Mr. Letton?
No updates from Wahatan. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Crystal?
Thank you. No updates for me today. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your participation today. And I think that's everyone. I'm last. You may have seen on the agenda that I did have a short item just to mention that our public draft area plan for the TED, the Tahoe El Dorado area plan, is out. It was released February 27th. We're in the scoping period right now, looking to take comments until April 3rd. So public meeting in Myers tonight, virtual meeting tomorrow night. APC will be coming before RPC, right? Yes, RPC, March 25th. So is that good, Graham? That statement?
That's great. Yep. Thank you for providing that. And there'll be more at the RPC, but yeah, we are to add on to that, TRPA is in its scoping period as well. It's a joint review. So the public can obviously direct any of us to, if there's more questions about how to submit comments or all that, we'll provide the information, but look for it on RPC.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'll just say we do have a website, tedareaplan.com, TED areaplan.com. You can find the complete draft there. All the information that we're looking for feedback on. We are really welcoming input. I guarantee you we did not get everything right. There's probably 1,000 pages. If you want to talk to me about anything, you know how to get a hold of me. I'd be happy to sit down and go through anything. But we're really excited to have that out on the street. Very big deal for us. Okay, thank you all. Let's go now to public interest comments, item 6. Again, we will take public comment from members of the public. We'll go in the room first. There's no one here anymore, so we'll be coming online. So for members of the public joining us via Zoom, you can now click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or dial *9 on your telephone. You'll be unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Please be aware we are prohibited from taking action on items not listed on our agenda. So, Catherine.
Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised to comment.
Okay. Great. And with that, I'll take us to item 7. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you all. We stand adjourned at 1:10. Good long meeting today. Everyone have a great afternoon. See you next month.
Thank you.